Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened Gear 5th power and fell in love with Nami? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sun God of Kokoyashi. The end was a cacophony of mud, blood, and a sorrow so profound it had its own gravity. The world, his world, was tearing itself apart at the seams. He had felt the pull of a power beyond comprehension, a desperate, final gambit from an enemy that was more a concept than a person. And in his own moment of desperation, reaching for a power he had only just begun to understand, something had broken. It wasn't a sound, it was the absence of it, a sudden, deafening silence that consumed the screams of the battlefield. Then came a single, deep, resonant beat. Dump. It was in his chest, in his bones, the rhythm of a colossal heart. Light, pure and blinding, erupted from his very being. He felt his physical form lose its meaning, his consciousness stretching like taffy across dimensions he couldn't name. The faces of his friends, Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, flashed before him, expressions of horror and confusion, their voices swallowed by the roaring light. He tried to reach for them, to ground himself in the familiar weight of their existence, but his fingers passed through nothing. The world was paint, and he was the water, smearing it all into a meaningless blur. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The transition was a physical blow. The scent of rain-soaked earth and iron was replaced by the sting of salt and something else, something rotten, like old fish left too long in the sun. The pressure on his eardrums was immense. He was falling. Sky, a brilliant and unforgiving blue he hadn't seen in days, rushed up to meet him. Below, an island mosaic with orange groves and a small, terror-stricken village was getting very large, very fast. He didn't panic. The beating in his chest, the dump, was a steady, calming presence. It felt more natural than his own heartbeat. Instinct took over. He twisted in the air, his body suddenly feeling light, malleable. He tucked and rolled, aiming for an open patch of dirt near a strangely designed building that looked like a fish's head. The impact wasn't a crash. It was more of a boing. The ground beneath him depressed like a trampoline, absorbing the kinetic energy of his fall and launching him a few feet back into the air before he landed softly on his feet in the center of a perfect, bowl-shaped crater. The shockwave, a visible ripple of force, billowed outwards, kicking up a storm of dust and rattling the tiles on the nearby roofs. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Naruto straightened up, brushing non-existent dust from his tattered orange and black pants, the only clothing that had survived the dimensional tear. His torso was bare, crisscrossed with old scars and the fresh, fading marks of a war he had just been fighting. He took a breath, his senses, sharpened by a lifetime of combat and the deep well of nature energy he could still feel humming beneath the island's surface, painting a grim picture. He saw them first. Monsters. Fish men. He corrected himself, his mind kata, logging the details with a shinobi's precision. One with a shark's nose and teeth, radiating an aura of smug cruelty. An octopus man with 6 arms and a dopey expression. A dozen others, all armed, all sneering down at a small cluster of terrified villagers. Then he saw her. She was on her knees in the dirt, a young woman with vibrant orange hair, the color of a sunset. Her clothes were simple, her figure lean. On her left shoulder was a tattoo, a dark, intricate design that seemed to burn with shame. In her hand, she held a small, wicked-looking knife. Her face was a mask of utter, soul-crushing despair. Her shoulders trembled, and tears carved clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. The shark man laughed, a grating, ugly sound. Go on, Nami, do it, stab that mark. Does it hurt? Does it feel like a decade of betrayal? Good. That's the feeling of belonging to the Arlong pirates. You can never escape it, no matter how hard you try. The woman, Nami, let out a choked sob. Our knuckles were white around the knife's handle. She raised it high, not towards the fish man, but towards her own shoulder, aiming directly for the tattoo. Arlong, she screamed, her voice cracking, with a pain so pure it was a physical thing. Arlong. And that was the sound. That was the crying he had heard across the void. It wasn't just a scream of anger, it was the sound of a spirit breaking. Of hope being systematically and cruelly extinguished. Something inside Naruto shifted. The calm, observant shinobi receded, and the other thing, the new thing, rose to the surface. The beating in his chest intensified. Th dump, th dump, th dump. It wasn't just a heartbeat. It was a declaration. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that felt like laughter and freedom intertwined. A low, guttural hum started in Naruto's throat, a sound of amusement and rising indignation. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming, joyous sound that cut through the tension like a thunderclap. Every head snapped towards him. The villagers stared, their fear momentarily replaced by confusion. The fishmen scowled, their mockery interrupted. Arlong turned his head slowly, his predatory eyes narrowing on the blond man standing in the crater. "Who the hell are you?" Arlong snarled. "Another human come to play hero." Naruto's laughter subsided, but a wide, irrepressible grin remained plastered on his face. His blue eyes, usually the color of a clear sky, began to glow with an inner golden light. His blonde hair, still damp from the trans-dimensional ether, bled to a stark, brilliant white. Flickering and dancing as if it were made of flame. A faint, steam-like vapor began to wreath around his shoulders and neck, forming a divine-looking scarf of cloud. "Hero." Naruto tilted his head, the grin widening. "Nah, I just can't stand seeing a pretty lady cry." Nami froze, the knife hovering inches from her skin. She stared at this impossible man, at the transformation that was happening before her very eyes. It was absurd. It was insane. But the sound, that rhythmic th dump, echoed not just in the air but in her own soul, a phantom beat that promised something. "Kill him," Arlong ordered, pointing a webbed finger. "And make it hurt." One of the fish men, a portly one with a mouth like a cannon, stepped forward. He took a deep breath, his cheeks puffing out, and spat a jet of water with the force of a bullet. "Water gun." The villagers shrieked, shielding their eyes. The water projectile shot towards Naruto's head. He didn't move. He just watched it come, his grin never wavering. At the last second, his head simply warped. It bent backwards at a 90-degree angle, completely limp like a piece of rubber, the water stream zipping harmlessly over him. Then, with a comical sprowing, his head snapped back into place. He blinked. Whoa, that felt weird. The fish man stared, his jaw slack. Arlong's eyes widened slightly. What was that?" A villager whispered. Before anyone could process it, the octopus man, Hachin, charged forward. "Don't just stand there. Take this." Ink jet. He sprayed a glob of black ink straight at Naruto's face. Naruto's response was to stomp his foot. The ground beneath the ink's path suddenly behaved like a stretched rubber sheet. The ink splattered onto the dirt, which then flung it straight back up, neatly coating Hachin's own face in a perfect, black circle. Naruto chided, wagging a finger that stretched to twice its normal length. He then whipped his arm forward, his hand growing to the size of a small barrel. It wasn't a punch. His fingers, impossibly long and flexible, zipped past Hachin, weaving in and out, and in less than a second, had tied all 6 of the octopus man's arms into a tight, intricate knot. Hachin stumbled, tripped over his own tangled limbs, and fell flat on his face with a muffled grunt. "Two down," Naruto said, his giant hand shrinking back to normal size. He looked around at the other fish men, his glowing eyes alight with playful challenge. Who's next? This was not a fight. This was a playground, and he was making up the rules as he went. A fish man specializing in fish man karate lunged. His hand chopped down in a move meant to shatter bone. Naruto didn't block, he simply flattened. His entire body compressed down to a 2-dimensional sheet of paper, fluttering to the ground. The karate chop sliced through empty air. As the fish man stared in disbelief at the human-shaped drawing on the ground, Naruto peeled himself off the dirt, already back in 3 dimensions, and poked him in the forehead. The fish man's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. "This is impossible," Kurubi, the karate master, stammered. "He's not a devil fruit user. I saw him fall from the sky. He should be normal." Arlong was no longer smug. His face was a mask of cold fury and a sliver of something he hadn't felt in a very long time, uncertainty. It doesn't matter what he is. All of you, attack at once. Tear him limb from limb. A dozen fishmen charged, a wave of muscle, fins, and teeth. The villagers screamed. Nami watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. The knife forgotten in her hand. Naruto just laughed again, the sound echoing with the drumbeat in his chest. Now this is more like it. He leapt, but instead of falling, he just kept going. Running on the empty air as if it were solid ground. He bounced from one imaginary platform to another, his movements fluid and utterly nonsensical. The fishmen looked up, bewildered. Hey, fish face, catch, Naruto yelled, pointing at Arlong. Arlong looked up just in time to see Naruto pluck one of the charging fishmen out of the crowd, stretch his legs out like rubber bands, and kick him like a soccer ball. The fishman screamed as he flew directly at Arlong, who had to sidestep to avoid being taken out by his own man. Chaos erupted. Naruto turned Arlong Park into his personal pinball machine. He stretched his arms to 50 feet, grabbing two fishmen and clapping them together. He inflated his torso into a giant, bouncy ball and cannonballed into a group of them, sending them flying in all directions. A fishman fired a cannon from the upper deck of the building. Naruto saw the cannonball, grinned, and enlarged his hand to catch it. He squeezed it, and with a squeak, it turned into a tiny, harmless pellet which he flicked away. My turn, he announced. He ripped a palm tree from the ground, roots and all, as if it were a weed. He held it like a baseball bat, his body winding up in an exaggerated, cartoonish pose. Batter up. He swung, his body twisting like a corkscrew, and swatted three more fishmen clear over the building and into the sea with a deafening crack. In less than a minute, the courtyard was littered with groaning, unconscious fishmen. Only one was left standing, his saw-like nose twitching, his muscular body trembling with rage. Arlong, you freak, Arlong growled, his voice low and dangerous. He pulled his weapon from his back, a massive, serrated blade called the Kiribaki. You think this is a game? I am a superior species. I will show you the difference between a lowly human and a fish man. He lunged, a blur of blue skin and flashing steel. He was incredibly fast, his movements a predatory explosion of power. The Kiribaki sliced through the air where Naruto's neck had been. But Naruto was already gone. He was standing on the roof of Arlong Park, balancing on the tip of the dorsal fin decoration. Ooh, shiny, Naruto said, looking at the blade, but you're way too slow. Arlong roared and launched himself upwards, his powerful legs propelling him 50 feet into the air. He spun, bringing the Kiribaki around in a devastating arc. Naruto didn't even try to dodge. He just held up a hand. The blade slammed into his palm and stopped. It didn't cut him. It just bent, the serrated steel warping arrow wound his hand as if it were made of soft clay. Arlong's eyes were wide with genuine shock. How? Because it's funnier this way, Naruto said, his grin returning. He closed his hand, and the Kiribaki shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. My turn. He didn't move. His eyes, however, burned with that golden light. He looked at Arlong, floating in the air, and his presence seemed to expand, to become as vast and undeniable as the sun itself. Arlong, for the first time, felt a primal, instinctual fear. This wasn't a human. This wasn't a devil fruit user. This was something else, something ancient and terrifying. Naruto's arm began to swell, and swell, and swell. It grew to an impossible size, larger than the Arlong Park building itself, a colossal fist of flesh and bone wreathed in the white, steam-like clouds of his power. It blotted out the sun. I don't know what this power's old name was, Naruto said, his voice booming across the island, yet sounding perfectly conversational to Nami on the ground. But for you, let's call this a sun's blessing. He punched. It wasn't a fast punch. It was a deliberate, almost lazy swing. But it connected with Arlong in midair with the force of a tectonic plate. There was no explosion, no gore. There was just a comical thwack that echoed across the sea. Arlong's body didn't break. It flattened against the colossal fist for a split second, his eyes bugging out of his head like in a drawing. Then he was launched. He flew. He flew past the horizon. He flew so fast and so far that he became a tiny, glittering speck in the brilliant blue sky. For a brief moment, A star seemed to twinkle in the daylight. Then he was gone. Naruto's giant arm shrank back to its normal size in a rush of air. He landed softly on the ground, the white hair receding back to sun-kissed blonde. The golden glow in his eyes softening to their normal, vibrant blue. The steam-like scarf of clouds dissipated into the sea breeze. The drums in his chest faded to a gentle, steady rhythm, then silence. He stood there for a moment, breathing normally, looking at the devastation he had wrought. It was a mess, but a joyful one. Unconscious fishmen were tangled up in knots, stuck in the rubberized ground. Or just sleeping peacefully where they'd been poked. The silence that followed was absolute. The villagers, who had been hiding and peeking, slowly stood up. The IR faces were a mixture of slack-jawed astonishment, terror, and dawning, disbelieving joy. Genzo, the pinwheel-headed man who was their de facto leader, took a hesitant step forward. Naruto ignored them all. His gaze fell on the orange-haired girl still kneeling in the dirt. Nami. The knife had fallen from her numb fingers. She was staring at the empty sky where Arlong had vanished, then at Naruto. Her sea-green eyes wide and unblinking. The dam of her composure, held for 10 long years, finally broke. She didn't just cry. She wailed, a raw, cathartic sound of a decade of pain, fear, and hopeless struggle finally being released. He walked over to her, his footsteps quiet on the dirt. He knelt in front of her, his presence warm and completely non-threatening. He looked at her arm, at the ugly tattoo and the raw red skin around it where she had been stabbing herself. That looks like it hurts, he said softly. He reached out. Nami flinched instinctively, a lifetime of abuse making her recoil from any sudden movement. But he was gentle. He didn't touch her. He just held his hand a few inches above her shoulder. A soft, golden light, warm and gentle as the first rays of dawn, emanated from his palm. It felt like the purest form of kindness she had ever known. She watched, mesmerized, as the angry, red skin began to calm. The small cuts and scrapes she'd inflicted on herself vanished. The skin smoothed over, leaving no trace of her self-inflicted wounds. He couldn't erase the tattoo, but he had erased the pain she had just caused herself. He pulled his hand back, the light fading. He looked her in the eyes, his own filled with a simple, guileless empathy. Better. Nami could only nod, her throat thick with unshed tears. The entire village was free. Her debt was gone. Her life, which she had sold piece by piece, was her own again. And it had all happened in less than 5 minutes because a man who laughed at physics had fallen from the sky. Who? She finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. What? Are you? Naruto offered a small, tired smile. It was the first genuine, non-manic expression she had seen on his face, and it held a deep, profound loneliness. She resonated with a part of her she kept locked away. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said. He gestured vaguely at the sky. I'm a little lost. As for what I am, I don't really know anymore. He then looked directly into her eyes. And his next words cut through all her confusion, all her fear, and struck the very core of her being. I just heard you crying. It was a really, really sad sound. I wanted to make it stop. For the second time that day, Nami's world tilted on its axis. He hadn't come to be a hero. He hadn't come for treasure or glory. He had come because he had heard her pain. This strange, impossible God-man had crossed worlds, it seemed, just to answer her scream. The villagers began to cheer. The sound started as a few hesitant shouts, then grew into a roar of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. They swarmed the courtyard, lifting each other up, crying tears of joy. Some of them started towards Naruto, to thank him, to worship him, but Genzo held them back, sensing the moment between the stranger and Nami was a fragile, important thing. Nami pushed herself to her feet, her legs still shaky. She looked at her village, celebrating a freedom she had dreamed of for a decade. Then she looked back at Naruto, who was watching the celebration with a soft, wistful expression. He was a force of nature, a living calamity of joy, but he was also utterly alone. As alone as she had felt just moments before. Her mind, always sharp, always calculating, began to work. He was lost. He had no ship, no crew, no direction. He possessed a power that defied all logic, a power that could probably topple kingdoms. Yet he used it to stop a girl from crying. She, on the other hand, knew the seas. She could read the sky, the currents, the moods of the ocean better than anyone. Her dream had always been to chart the entire world. A free world. He had given her that. An idea, bold and terrifying and exhilarating, took root in her mind. Later that night, the village was a riot of celebration. Music played, food was shared, and the air was thick with laughter. Naruto sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea, a plate of untouched food beside him. He stared out at the endless expanse of water, a mirror of the sky he had fallen from. Footsteps approached from behind. It was Nami. She had cleaned herself up. Her orange hair was damp, and she wore a simple skirt and shirt. She had a strip of white bandages wrapped around her shoulder, covering the Arlong pirate's tattoo. A temporary measure, but a deeply symbolic one. She sat down beside him, not too close, but not too far either. They sat in silence for a long time. The sounds of the party a distant, happy murmur. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice clear and steady. "You already said that," he replied, not looking at her. "So did everyone else. About 100 times. It doesn't feel like enough," she admitted. 10 years. For 10 years, that monster owned this island. Owned me. And you ended it in the time it takes to peel an orange." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real," he said, his voice quiet. "You're free. And you're lost," she stated, turning it from a question into a fact. He finally turned to look at her. He nodded. "Yeah, I don't think my home is on this planet. Or in this dimension. I don't know the right word. So what's your plan?" He shrugged, a gesture of profound uncertainty. "Find a way back, I guess. Though I have no idea how. I can't exactly punch a hole back to where I came from. I already tried." He held up his fist, which flickered for a second with a cartoonish, blurry energy before returning to normal. "Doesn't work that way, apparently." Nami looked from his face to the vast, dark ocean, and then back. A decision settled in her heart, firm and unshakable. This was it. This was her new path. Not a path of atonement, but one of adventure. Of purpose. "I can't get you back to your world," she said, her voice gaining a new confidence. "I don't know how to navigate dimensions." She paused, taking a breath. "But I am the best navigator in the East Blue. I can read the sea, the sky, and the currents. I can take you anywhere in this world you need to go. We can search for answers. For a way home." Naruto looked at her, surprised. "You'd do that? Why? You have your village back. You're free. You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, and a genuine, brilliant smile lit up her face. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile, and it was more stunning than the sunset her hair was named for. "This isn't about owing you. My dream is to draw a map of the entire world. But I was always going to do it alone. It was a dream born from getting away from this place." She gestured to the island. "You didn't just free my village, Naruto. You freed my dream, too. Maybe its first stop is helping a lost god find his way." She stood up and held out her hand. "So, what do you say? You need a navigator. I need an adventure. And a bodyguard who can punch people over the horizon seems like a good person to have around." He looked at her outstretched hand, then up at her determined, hopeful face. In her eyes, he didn't see worship or fear. He saw partnership. He saw a shared journey. For the first time since he'd arrived, he felt a flicker of something other than loss and disorientation. He felt a connection. He grinned, a wide, honest, Uzumaki grin, and took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin calloused from years of work. "All right, navigator," he said. "You've got a deal." Miles away, on a sterile and orderly marine base, a Den Mushi was ringing frantically. A flustered-looking communications officer held the receiver, his face pale. "Yes, sir, yes, I understand how it sounds," the officer stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The report is from our scout at the Gosa village aftermath. He says Arlong Park has been, well, playfully dismantled, is the term he used, sir." There was an incredulous squawk from the other end of the line. "No, sir, not destroyed, dismantled. He says the fish men were tied in knots. Arlong himself was punched into the sky. Our scout says he's not sure if he ever came down. The officer swallowed hard, reading from his notes. The witness reports are conflicting. They say a man fell from the sky. That his hair turned white and he laughed the whole time. That he turned the ground to rubber and ran on the air. The officer paused, bracing himself for the most unbelievable part. And, sir, multiple, credible witnesses, including our own scout, they all say the same thing. After the fight, he waded into the water to help retrieve some debris. He took a deep breath. Sir, whatever this man is, he can swim. The line went dead silent. For a full minute, the only sound was the crackle of the connection. The officer held the receiver, his own heart beating a frantic rhythm. He was sure he was about to be demoted or court-martialed for filing a prank report. Then, a low, cold voice came from the receiver, devoid of emotion. Send the full, unedited report to Fleet Admiral Sengoku's office. And send a copy to Mary Gioi's. Flag it for the 5 elders. Immediately, the line clicked dead. The officer slowly placed the receiver back on the shell, the world suddenly feeling a great deal larger, and a great deal more frightening. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Pirate King in the Cage. The ship was a small, sturdy caravel, more of a glorified fishing vessel than a true pirate craft, but it was theirs. They had liberated it from a group of small-time bandits, hiding out on a nameless island a day's sail from Kokoyasi. The fight had lasted all of 30 seconds, ending with the bandits' vessel neatly tied into the shape of a pretzel and the former occupants deposited gently on the beach. Stripped of their weapons and their ill-gotten ship, Nami had found a stash of berries hidden beneath a loose floorboard, enough to provision them for weeks, and had claimed the vessel as salvage. Naruto, who had never been on an open ocean ship before, found the whole experience exhilarating. He'd suggested naming it the Gutsy Ninja Frog, but Nami had vetoed that, with a look of such profound horror that he'd immediately backed down. She, in turn, proposed the Dawnbreaker, a name that spoke of new beginnings and the light that follows the dark. He had agreed instantly. Now, the Dawnbreaker was cutting through the calm waters of the East Blue, its single sail full of a steady wind that Nami seemed to have personally requested from the sky. On the horizon, a sprawling city rose from the sea, a place of historical weight and electric energy that Naruto could feel even from miles away. Logatown, Nami announced, one hand resting on the ship's railing, the other holding a spyglass to her eye. The town of the beginning and the end. It's the last stop in the East Blue before the Grand Line. They say the Pirate King, Gold Roger, was born here, and executed here. Naruto stood beside her, his bare feet planted firmly on the wooden deck. The sea breeze ruffled his blonde hair. He wore a simple pair of dark pants and a new black t-shirt he'd liberated, along with the ship. The bright orange of his old life feeling too loud for this new world. Executed, huh, he said, his voice quiet. So they caught the strongest guy and made an example out of him. That was the idea, Nami said, lowering the spyglass. She gave him a curious look. The world government wanted to scare everyone into submission. But with his last words, Roger told the world about his treasure, the One Piece. He turned his own execution into the starting gun for the great pirate era. Instead of ending something, he started the biggest thing this world has ever seen. Naruto's eyes were fixed on the town. He wasn't looking at the buildings, but at the idea of the place. A man who turned his death into a dream for millions. It resonated with the part of him that understood sacrifice. The part that had seen friends and teachers lay down their lives for a future they would never see. He must have been something else. He was a legend, Nami agreed. This town is full of them. It's also crawling with Marines. Strong ones. So, whatever you did in Kokoyasi, she let the warning hang in the air. Try not to do it here. We need supplies, a better compass for the Grand Line, and information. We don't need to get into a fight with a Marine captain with a grudge. Naruto grinned, a flash of his old, mischievous self. What, you mean no punching anyone over the horizon? Ah, you're no fun. Nami rolled her eyes, but a small smile played on her lips. I'm serious, Naruto. Your power, it's not normal. People fear what they don't understand. The bigger the scene you make, the bigger the target you paint on our backs. All right, I'll be good, he promised, holding his hands up in surrender. Stealth mode. Like a real shinobi. No one will even know I'm there. Nami sighed. That, I sincerely doubt. Quote, Logatown was a living, breathing entity. The streets were packed with sailors, merchants, bounty hunters, and pirates trying to look like they weren't pirates. The air was thick with the smells of tar, roasting meat, and the metallic tang of ambition. It was a place where dreams were either forged in fire or drowned in cheap ale. They split up to be more efficient. Nami, with a large portion of their funds, went to find the specific nautical equipment they'd need to survive the treacherous waters of Reverse Mountain and the Grand Line. Naruto was tasked, Ed, with stocking up on food and other basic provisions, a job he was surprisingly good at, haggling with vendors with a charismatic grin that seemed to charm discounts out of the sternest shopkeepers. He moved through the crowds with an unconscious grace, a predator's economy of motion that parted the sea of people without a single bump or shove. He wasn't trying to be intimidating, but there was an aura about him, a quiet confidence. A sense of coiled power held in perfect check, that made people instinctively give him space. He saw a pickpocket attempt to lift a wallet from a wealthy merchant, and with a movement too fast to see, Naruto had plucked the wallet from the thief's fingers and returned it to the merchant's pocket before the man even realized it was gone. The pickpocket just found D himself suddenly holding a half-eaten apple, staring at his empty hands in confusion. Naruto's work was done quickly, with several large sacks of food slung over his shoulder as if they weighed nothing. He found himself drawn towards the center of town. There, in a massive public square, stood the execution platform. It was old, the wood weathered and dark, but it dominated the square, a monument to a single, world-changing moment. A crowd was gathered, but they kept a respectful distance. Naruto drifted to the edge, his eyes on the wooden structure where a king had met his end. He could almost feel the echoes of it. The ghost of a defiant smile, the roar of a crowd, the shifting of an era. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to move closer. He set his supplies down near a wall and walked towards the platform. He ascended the wooden steps, each one creaking under his weight. When he reached the top, he turned and looked out over the square, over the heads of the gawking tourists and aspiring pirates. Towards the endless blue of the sea. He didn't feel like a king. He felt the weight of a cage, of a leader responsible for the lives and dreams of his people. A people he no longer had. He thought of Jiraiya, of his master who had died for a belief in a chosen one. He thought of Nagato, who had twisted that same belief into a doctrine of pain. He thought of Roger, a man he'd never met, who had used his own death to inspire freedom. What was his dream, in this new world? It wasn't to find a treasure. It wasn't to be a king. He closed his eyes, the salty wind on his face. The answer was simple, forged in the ashes of his own war-torn home and rekindled in the tears of a girl in Kokoyashi. He opened his eyes and spoke, his voice not a shout, but a clear, resonant declaration that carried across the square, silencing the ambient chatter. I won't be a pirate king, he said, the words directed at the sea, at the world itself. I'll build a world where no one has to buy their family's freedom. A world where kids don't have to grow up as weapons. A world where no one has to cry themselves to sleep, begging for a miracle. He paused, a sad smile touching his lips. A world where a hero isn't needed. Down in the crowd, a tall man in a dark green cloak, his face hidden by a hood and a strange red tattoo, stilled. He had been passing through, a phantom in the bustling town, but the words, and the quiet, immense gravity behind them, made him stop and look up. He saw the blond man on the scaffold, not as a pirate, but as something else entirely. A flicker of interest, perhaps even hope, crossed his stern features before he melted back into the shadows. On a nearby rooftop, another man had heard the words. He was a mountain of muscle, with stark white hair and a cigar jutting from his jaw. He wore a marine jacket open over his bare chest, 2 more giant cigars strapped to the side. This was Marine Captain Smoker. He had been watching the blond man since he'd entered the square. A nagging feeling in his gut telling him this was no ordinary tourist. A world without heroes, Smoker grunted to himself, smoke curling from his lips. Only a monster or a fool would say something like that. His eyes narrowed. That declaration, made on this sacred spot, was a challenge. It wasn't the brash ambition of a pirate, it was the quiet ideology of a revolutionary. In Smoker's black and white world, that was even more dangerous. As Naruto descended the steps, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't had since his arrival, he found his path blocked. Smoker stood before him, an implacable wall of white-clad justice. Several of his marines fanned out, cutting off any escape. "You've got a loud mouth for a nobody," Smoker said, his voice a low growl. "Pirate, revolutionary, or just an idiot?" Naruto looked at him, his gaze level. He could feel the power radiating from this man, the discipline, the unwavering conviction. This was no Arlong. This was a true warrior. "Just a guy who doesn't like the way things are," Naruto replied calmly. "That's what they all say," Smoker retorted. He took a drag from his cigar. "I've caught every pirate that's ever set foot in this town. You won't be the exception." He pointed his jeet at Naruto, the tip made of sea stone. "I don't know what you are, but you're not leaving Logatown." "I really don't have time for this," Naruto said with a sigh. "My navigator is probably wondering where I am. She can visit you in Impel Down," Smoker snarled, and then his lower body dissolved into a swirling vortex of thick, white smoke. White out. The smoke billowed outwards, engulfing Naruto. It wasn't just a smokescreen. It was dense, choking, and Smoker's fists, also made of smoke, began to lash out from every direction, aiming to pummel and capture him. Naruto didn't move. He stood perfectly still in the heart of the swirling vortex and closed his eyes. The world of sight vanished. The shouting of the crowd, the panicked cries of his name from a voice he recognized as Nami's somewhere in the distance, it all faded into the background. He drew on the energy of the world. The air around him grew still. The ground beneath his feet hummed. The chaotic swirl of smoke suddenly had a single, solid point within it, a core of life that he could sense as clearly as a beacon in the night. It was the man, Smoker. The rest was just a shell. He opened his eyes. They were no longer pure blue. A golden, horizontal bar now segmented each pupil, the mark of a perfect sage. Orange pigmentation, like war paint, appeared around his eyes. "Found you," he whispered. A fist made of dense smoke shot towards his face. Naruto didn't dodge. He simply reached out and grabbed it. Smoker, who expected his intangible fist to pass right through, felt a grip like iron clamp down on him. The sensation was impossible. It wasn't hockey. It felt natural. Like the world itself was holding him in place. "What?" Smoker grunted, his eyes widening in shock. "You're not made of smoke," Naruto said, his voice having a strange, resonant depth. "You're a man who makes smoke. There's a difference." With a flick of his wrist, Naruto threw the smoke fist. And Smoker's entire upper body was ripped out of the vortex, his solid form reappearing as he was sent tumbling through the air. He twisted, landing on his feet with a grunt, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. You can touch me," Smoker growled. "Are you a devil fruit user?" "No. Seastone should weaken you." "I get that a lot," Naruto said. He vanished. Not with smoke, not with a trick of the light, but with pure, unadulterated speed. He was simply gone from where he stood and appeared right in front of Smoker, his fist cocked back. The air around his knuckles was visibly distorting, gathering a sphere of crackling, rotating natural energy. It wasn't a Rasengan. It was just a punch, but a punch backed by the power of the planet. Smoker's instincts screamed. He crossed his arms, his jeet held in front of him, and poured all his strength into the block. The impact was like a thunderclap. It didn't throw Smoker back. It drove him down, cracking the cobblestones beneath his feet into a spiderweb of fissures. The jeet, a weapon designed to subdue the most powerful people in the world, vibrated violently. Smoker's arms went numb to the shoulder, the sheer force of the blow bypassing his defense and rattling his bones. He grunted in pain, his knees buckling. Naruto hadn't moved from his spot. He hadn't even followed through with the punch. He had simply tapped Smoker's guard. It was a message. "I could have ended this." "You're a Marine," Naruto said, his sage eyes boring into Smoker's. "You're not a tyrant like that fish man. You believe you're doing the right thing. I can respect that, so I'm not going to fight you." He lowered his fist. "But I'm also not going to let you stop me." For a moment, Smoker was too stunned to move. The sheer, overwhelming difference in power was something he had never experienced. He was the unstoppable force in the East Blue, and he had just been stopped as easily as a child. That moment was all Nami needed. "Naruto, you idiot, this way." A small, metallic rod flew through the air and landed at Naruto's feet. It was one of 3 identical rods Nami had just purchased. "It's a Klima-tacked piece," she yelled from an alleyway 50 yards away. "Grab it and run." Naruto scooped up the rod just as Smoker recovered, roaring in fury and lunging again, his body becoming smoke once more. "Don't you turn your back on me." "Sorry. Gotta go," Naruto called back, and with a single leap, he cleared a 2-story building and landed on a roof, breaking into a dead sprint. The sage markings faded from his eyes. After him, Smoker ordered his men, his own body rocketing into the air as a plume of smoke. "He's not getting away." A chase began through the labyrinthine streets and over the rooftops of Logatown. Naruto was faster, more agile, but Smoker could fly, cutting off his paths and boxing him in. "He's heading for the port," a marine shouted. "Cut him off," Smoker bellowed, coalescing on a rooftop directly in Naruto's path. Naruto skidded to a halt. He was cornered. Smoker was in front, and his men were closing in from behind. "Nowhere to run," Smoker growled. "Naruto, now!" Nami's voice screamed from the street below. She was standing beside the Dawnbreaker, which was already untied from the docks. She was holding 2 of the metallic rods, pointing them at the sky. "What are you doing?" Naruto asked, confused. "Just trust your navigator," she yelled back. "Heat ball, cool ball." From the end of one rod, a small orb of hot, humid air shot into the sky. From the other, an orb of cold, dense air followed. They collided directly above the port. The result was instantaneous and dramatic. The sudden, extreme temperature differential created a pocket of condensation so dense it was like a wall. A thick, impenetrable fog bank erupted out of thin air, blanketing the entire port in seconds. "What the hell?" Smoker shouted, his vision completely obscured. The fog was so thick he couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. "Jump!" Nami screamed. Naruto didn't hesitate. He trusted her. He took a running leap off the roof, plunging blindly into the white abyss. He fell for what felt like an eternity. Before landing with a soft thud on the deck of the Dawnbreaker, right beside a grinning, triumphant Nami. "See," she said, looking immensely proud of herself. "Science. You were amazing," Naruto said, genuinely awestruck. "Get the sail," she ordered, already at the helm. The wind is about to shift. As if on cue, a strong gust of wind, a direct consequence of the pressure change her fog bank had created, caught the sail. The Dawnbreaker lurched forward, cutting through the fog and out into the open sea, leaving a very confused and furious marine captain screaming into the mist behind them. High above the mortal world, in the pristine, sterile bubble of Mary Geoise, Saint Icarus of the Celestial Dragons was not pleased. He sat not on a throne of gold, but in a stark white room, empty. Save for the chair he occupied and a single, massive visual Den Mushi projecting an image onto the far wall. Unlike his brethren, Icarus found decadent displays to be a distraction from the purity of their divine purpose. He was slender, with sharp, intelligent features and cold, calculating eyes. He wore the traditional white robes and bubble helmet of his station, but he wore them like a uniform, not an ornament. On the screen was a crystal-clear recording of the events at Kokoyasi village. It had been captured by a long-range surveillance snail deployed to monitor Arlong's territory. The quality was unprecedented. He watched the blonde man fall from the sky. He watched him transform, the white hair, the steam, the impossible grin. He watched the laws of physics bend and break for this creature's amusement. He watched Arlong, a formidable pirate worth 20 million berries, be treated like a child's toy. The final punch, the one that sent the fish man into the stratosphere, was played and replayed in slow motion. A servant, trembling, entered the room and bowed low. "My lord, the 5 elders have reviewed the footage you sent. They share your concern." Icarus didn't look away from the screen. "Concern is a mild word for blasphemy," he said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. "The world government is the vessel of divine order. The celestial dragons are the blood of the gods who created it. That order is absolute. It is predicated on a hierarchy of power that is natural and immutable. Devil fruits, Haki, the strength of giants, all of it exists within the framework of our world. It can be categorized, understood, and controlled. He gestured a slender, gloved hand at the screen, where Naruto was now healing Nami's arm with a gentle, golden light. This is not of our world. This is an outside factor. A warrior of liberation, the old texts called him. A false god who brings not order, but chaos disguised as joy. A being whose very existence tells the slaves, the ants, the common filth of this world that their chains are a choice. He turned his head, his cold eyes finally settling on the servant. It is the single greatest existential threat to the stability of the last 800 years. The servant swallowed, his throat dry. What are your orders, Saint Icarus? The elders have granted my petition, Icarus said, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. They have authorized the formation of a new unit, answerable only to me. A unit that operates outside the purview of the Marines and even Cypher Pol Igus Zero. We will call it Cypher Pol Omega. The final solution. He rose from his chair and walked towards a hidden panel in the wall. It slid open, revealing a single, kneeling figure cloaked in shadow. The figure was perfectly still, a model of lethal patience. This is my new hound, Icarus said. Agent Silas. The figure looked up. His face was sharp and ascetic, his eyes devoid of any emotion. He was the physical embodiment of silence. Silas, Icarus commanded, your first target is the anomaly. The one they call Naruto Uzumaki. You will not engage. You will not be seen. You will hunt him, study him, and learn his every weakness. The world government sees a nuisance. I see a god that must be unmade. Silas bowed his head. As you command. Your unique abilities should prove effective, Icarus mused. The false god arrives with the drums of liberation. Does he not? A sound that inspires rebellion. He looked at Silas, his smile widening. Then it is only fitting that I send a man who can create perfect, absolute silence to greet him. Go, and silence those drums for me. Silas nodded once, then melted back into the shadows, gone as if he had never been there. Icarus turned back to the screen, his obsession renewed. The hunt had begun. Hours later, the Dawnbreaker was sailing under a canopy of brilliant stars. The lights of Logatown were a faint memory on the horizon. Naruto was leaning against the mast, polishing the metal rod Nami had given him. She was at the helm, charting their course on a large piece of parchment. The sea was calm, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. That was a pretty neat trick back there, Naruto said, breaking the comfortable silence. Making fog out of nothing. It's not nothing, she corrected without looking up. It's manipulating atmospheric temperature and humidity. It's a science. Those are called weather balls. The rods can store them. I've been reading about this stuff for years. I just never had the equipment to try it. Well, it saved our skins, he said. He looked down at the rod. You're really smart, you know that. She finally looked up from her map, a faint blush on her cheeks. I'm a navigator. It's my job to be smart. You're the one who punches things. Hey, I can be smart too. He protested. I came up with Sage Mode all by myself. Mostly. She laughed, a real, musical laugh. Sage Mode, is that what that was? With the weird eyes. Yeah, it lets me use nature energy. It's how I could hit that smoke guy. I could feel where his real body was inside all the, well, smoke. Nami sobered, her expression turning serious. That man, Smoker, he was different. Naruto, he was strong. And that weapon he had, it's called a jeet. The tip is made of sea stone. It has the same effect as the sea on devil fruit users. It drains their energy. Good thing I'm not a devil fruit user then, Naruto said with a shrug. That's not the point, she insisted, her voice tight with worry. The point is, that's the kind of power the world government has at its command. Captains, vice admirals, admirals, they get stronger and stronger. You can't just go around picking fights with them. He walked over and stood beside her at the helm, looking at the map she was drawing. It was intricate, detailed, and beautiful. I didn't pick that fight. He picked it with me. But you're right, that guy, he had a fire in his eyes. A belief. I'd rather not fight people like that. He then looked from the map to her. You're worried. Of course I'm worried, she snapped, frustration coloring her tone. I just got my freedom, and I tied my futu. Re to a man who declares a new world order on the most famous execution scaffold in the East Blue and then gets into a brawl with the top marine in town. We're not even on the Grand Line yet and we already have a marine captain who will probably chase us to the ends of the earth. He didn't get defensive. He just listened, his gaze soft. When she was done, he nodded. Okay. His simple acceptance seemed to take the wind out of her sails. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You're the navigator. You're the strategist, he said, his voice completely serious. I have the power to knock down mountains, but you're the one who tells me which mountains to knock down and when. If you say we need to be quiet, we'll be quiet. If you say we need to run, we'll run. I trust your judgment more than my own fists. Nami was stunned into silence. She had expected him to argue, to be defensive, to spout some nonsense about guts and never giving up. But this was absolute, unconditional trust. He wasn't just placating her. He was handing her the reins. He was a godlike being, and he was making her, a thief from the East Blue, his tactician. My grand plan. A world where no one has to cry, it's just words without a path, he continued. His voice softer now. You're the one who draws the path, Nami. You're the one who will get us there. She stared at him, her heart doing a strange flutter in her chest. The respect in his eyes was more intoxicating than any treasure. This was a partnership, real and tangible. He wasn't her bodyguard. She wasn't his guide. They were two parts of a whole. She finally found her voice. A bit shaky but full of renewed resolve. She pointed a finger at a spot on the map, at the treacherous mountain that marked the entrance to their goal. All right then, Mr. Liberator. Our first stop is Reverse Mountain. We're entering the Grand Line. And you're going to do exactly what I say, when I say it. Got it? A huge, brilliant grin spread across Naruto's face. You got it, Navigator. She couldn't help but smile back. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a thrilling, terrifying excitement. The world was huge and dangerous, and they were sailing right into its heart. But looking at the impossible man beside her, she felt, for the first time, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sands of a Broken Kingdom. The Dawnbreaker was a good ship, but she was not built for the vagaries of the Grand Line. They had barely survived the chaotic, counterintuitive currents of Reverse Mountain. A feat Nami accomplished through a combination of brilliant navigational instinct, sheer terror, and Naruto creating a massive rubber bumper out of the ship's prow to bounce them off a rock face that had appeared out of the spray. Now, they were in the Grand Line proper, and the world felt different. The sky was a harsher blue, the sea a deeper, more menacing shade, and the weather was a petulant child, throwing tantrums of hail and scorching sun within the same hour. Their crew had grown by two. In a port town famous for its dueling culture, they'd picked up Kale, a Ronin-like swordsman with a perpetually unimpressed expression and a blade that moved like lightning. He'd joined after Naruto had disarmed him in a spar without ever drawing a weapon, simply turning the ground beneath Kale's feet to pudding and making him trip. Kale, a man who valued strength above all, had declared that following such an absurdly powerful individual was the only logical path forward. The second was Leo, a lanky teenager with a slingshot and a wild mop of curly hair, who they'd found being run out of town for telling tall tales. He'd claimed he could shoot the pips out of a grape from 200 paces. Naruto, amused, had held up a grape. Leo, terrified at being called on his bluff, had not only shot the pip out but had threaded the needle through the hole in a coin Naruto flicked into the air at the same time. His stories were wild exaggerations, but his aim was supernatural. He'd sworn his undying loyalty on the spot. Now, this motley crew of a reality-warping god, a master navigator, a stoic swordsman, and a sharpshooting liar were sailing towards the coordinates Nami had procured, the kingdom of Alabasta. The first thing they felt was the heat. It rolled off the island in waves, a physical presence that shimmered above the sand-colored coastline. Even Naruto, whose endurance was monstrous, felt a trickle of sweat run down his back. The log pose is set, Nami said, her brow furrowed as she studied the strange three-pronged compass that was their lifeline. This is it, Alabasta. It's supposed to be a thriving kingdom, one of the oldest and most respected in the world government. She gestured towards the shore. That doesn't look thriving. The port of Nanohana was draped in a palpable lethargy. The people moved slowly, their shoulders slumped, their faces etched with a deep-seated weariness. A fine layer of sand coated everything, a constant reminder of the desert that was slowly encroaching on the once fertile land. There was no joy here. No commerce. Just a quiet, simmering desperation. Something's wrong, Naruto said, his voice low. He closed his eyes, activating Sage Mode for just a second. It wasn't just the heat or the sand. He could feel the land itself. It was thirsty, grieving. The whole island is crying, he whispered. Stay sharp, Kale grunted, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. Desperate places make for desperate people. They docked and went ashore, splitting up to gather information. Kale and Leo were sent to find a tavern, the universal source of all rumor and complaint. Nami went to the port authority to register their ship, hoping to glean some official news. Naruto, tasked with simply walking and observing, found himself drawn to the town square. There, a commotion was brewing. A man in a gaudy outfit was standing on a crate, shouting at a small, despondent crowd. It's the king's fault. King Cobra, in his infinite wisdom, hoarded the dance powder. He used it to make rain fall only on the capital, Alubarna, while the rest of us bake in the sun. He's stealing our water. He's killing our land. Naruto watched, his expression unreadable. He saw the faces in the crowd, the flicker of anger that sparked in their tired eyes. They wanted someone to blame, and this man was serving it to them on a silver platter. He noticed a few other men, similarly dressed, weaving through the crowd, murmuring agreements, stoking the flames of dissent. It was organized, a performance. Then he saw the cart. It was overturned, and several bags stamped with the royal crest had split open, spilling a fine, blue powder onto the sandy ground. It was the dance powder, the supposed proof of the king's treachery. This is proof, the man on the crate roared, pointing at the spilled powder. Seized from a royal convoy. He mocks our suffering. Naruto walked forward, his calm presence parting the angry crowd. He knelt by the spilled powder, ignoring the shouts of the men who had staged the scene. He scooped up a handful of the blue dust. He sniffed it. He rubbed it between his fingers. It was just chalk dust. Dyed blue. He stood up and looked at the man on the crate. You're a terrible liar, Naruto said, his voice casual, but carrying over the murmur of the crowd. The man, a Baroque Works agent named Mr. 11, faltered. What did you say, you brat? I said you're a liar, Naruto repeated, letting the chalk dust trickle from his fingers. This isn't dance powder. It's just crushed rock. It wouldn't make a cloud sweat, let alone make it rain. He looked around at the crowd, his gaze sweeping over their faces. And you, he pointed to one of the agitators, have blue dust on the cuff of your pants. And you, he pointed to another, have it under your fingernails. You didn't seize this cart. You staged it. The crowd went silent. Their anger, so easily kindled, was now replaced by confusion. They looked at the men Naruto had pointed out, who were now sweating for an entirely different reason. He's lying, Mr. 11 sputtered. He's a government agent, trying to protect the king. Am I? Naruto asked. He turned to the crowd again. I just got here. I don't know your king. But I know a lie when I see one. Heyo. PLE who tell the truth don't have to work this hard to sell it. His eyes hardened slightly, and they don't prey on the pain of others to do it. Before the Baroque Works agents could react, Naruto clapped his hands together. A small, contained shockwave of air, a tiny puff of his power, erupted from his palms. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to kick up the sand and the chalk dust into a swirling cloud. The blue dust coated the conspirators, turning them all into comical, sputtering blue figures. The crowd, seeing the proof so plainly, began to murmur, their anger now directed at the deceivers. The agents, exposed and humiliated, drew their swords. Kill him. Naruto just sighed. I was trying to be subtle. He didn't move. From the rooftops, two small, hard pellets shot through the air with whip-crack sounds. They struck the sword hands of the two lead agents, causing them to cry out and drop their weapons. It was Leo, his slingshot already reloaded. On the ground, a dark blur resolved into Kale, the hilt of his sword striking the back of Mr. 11's neck, sending him to the ground unconscious. The rest of the agents, seeing their leader down and their odds suddenly very poor, turned and fled. Naruto gave a thumbs up to his crewmates. The crowd was silent, staring at him. He hadn't attacked anyone, but he had dismantled the lie and neutralized the threat with an almost casual authority. A figure, cloaked and hooded, who had been watching from the shadowed archway of a nearby building, slipped away unnoticed. The man, Silas, tapped the side of his head. His devil fruit power wasn't just about creating silence. It was about perceiving the world through sound and vibration. He hadn't needed to see the fight. He had heard it. He'd heard the vibration of Leo's slingshot, the subtle shift in air pressure from Kale's movements, the resonant hum of Naruto's clap. Most importantly, he'd heard the shift in the crowd's heartbeats, from anger to confusion to gratitude. This anomaly didn't just fight, he inspired. It was a dangerous quality. He sent a silent, coded vibration through the ground, a preliminary report to his master. Target demonstrates charismatic and tactical acumen. Not just a brute. Threat level analysis requires recalibration. The reunion on the Dawnbreaker was tense. Nami had learned of the 5-year drought and the brewing civil war. Kale and Leo had heard tales of a mysterious hero named Sir Crocodile, a member of the 7 warlords of the sea, who had been protecting the towns from pirates. It all felt connected, a web of deceit they were only just beginning to see. So this crocodile is a government-sanctioned pirate, Nami summarized, pacing the deck. He's hailed as a hero, but the country is falling apart. And his organization, Baroque Works, is secretly instigating the rebellion. They're playing both sides. They're trying to make the people hate their king, Naruto added, so they'll accept a new ruler. This crocodile guy, it's a coup, Kale stated flatly. So what do we do? Leo asked, nervously fiddling with his slingshot. This is, like, a whole country. And a warlord. I once told a girl I fought a warlord and she didn't talk to me for a week. It was then that they were found. A small sand skiff, pushed by a strange, sail-like creature, pulled alongside their ship. On it were a man with the number 5 on his coat, a woman in a garish outfit. And a third figure, a girl with blue hair and a large, hooded duck. You're the ones from Nanohana, the man, Mr. 5, said. Our orders were to eliminate the princess and anyone she spoke to. It seems you've made our job easier by gathering in one place. The girl with blue hair, Princess Vivi, looked at them with wide, desperate eyes. Please, you have to get away. They'll kill you. Mr. 5 laughed. No one gets away from me. He flicked a booger from his nose. Nose fancy cannon. The booger shot through the air like a bullet, exploding against the Dawnbreaker's mast with surprising force. Naruto just stared. He just flicked a booger at our ship. Gross. Leo yelped. The woman, Miss Valentine, giggled and leapt into the air, floating down with a parasol. I'll handle this. 10,000 kilogram press. Her body suddenly became incredibly heavy, and she aimed to crash down and splinter the deck. Naruto didn't even look up. He stomped his foot. The settee on of the deck beneath Miss Valentine turned to rubber, and she bounced off it like a child on a trampoline, screaming as she was launched high into the air. Mr. 5 stared in shock, just long enough for Kale to move. The swordsman was a blur, his blade drawn and sheathed in the same motion. All the buttons on Mr. 5's coat clattered to the deck, neatly sliced off, and his belt fell to his ankles, causing his pants to drop. Humiliated and exposed, he was helpless as Leo fired a pellet of knockout gas, a new invention of his, that hit him square in the face. He crumpled to the ground. Miss Valentine finally came down, landing hard on the sand skiff, splintering the wood. Vivi and her duck, Kuru, could only stare in awe. You defeated them, Vivi stammered. Just like that. They were weird, Naruto said with a shrug. And rude. He then looked at Vivi, his expression softening. You're a princess, huh? You've got a lot of people counting on you. On the deck of the Dawnbreaker, under the oppressive heat of the sun. Vivi told them everything. About Crocodile's master plan, Utopia. About his goal to find the ancient weapon Pluton, rumored to be hidden somewhere in Alabasta. About he had used his resources to create the drought and frame her father, all to seize control of the country and its military might. Her story was one of grief, responsibility, and dwindling hope. When she was finished, She bowed her head. Tears in her eyes. I know it's not your fight. But I have to get to Yuba, to warn the rebel leader, Koza, before he marches on the capital. If they fight, hundreds of thousands will die. And Crocodile will win no matter who loses. I'm begging you, please, just get me across this desert. Nami looked at the map, her face grim. A warlord, a secret organization with thousands of agents. An entire kingdom on the brink of civil war, this is insane. Yeah, Leo agreed, his face pale. Insanely scary. Kale was silent, his arms crossed. Naruto listened to all of it, his gaze fixed on Vivi. He saw the crushing weight on her shoulders. He saw a leader trying to save her people, just as he had tried to save his. He stepped forward and put a hand on her shoulder. We're not just going to get you across the desert, princess. Vivi looked up, confused. What? Nami's head snapped up. Naruto, what are you doing? Nami, you said it yourself, Naruto said, turning to her. They're playing both sides. The rebellion and the kingdom are just puppets. Trying to stop the rebels is treating a symptom, not the disease. We need to cut the strings. He looked at the map in her hands. Where is he? Where's the puppeteer? Nami stared at him, then at the map. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face as she understood. The fear in her eyes was replaced by the thrill of a high-stakes gamble. This was his nature, not to run, not to hide, but to charge directly at the heart of the problem. And it was her job to make sure the charge was a smart one. Rainbase, she said, her finger tapping the map. It's a city built around a massive casino, run by Crocodile himself. It's his base of operations. The command center for all of Baroque works. Then that's where we're going, Naruto declared. We're not going to stop a war. We're going to steal it from him. The Alabasta Desert was a merciless, beautiful hell. During the day, the sun beat down with a physical weight, stealing moisture from the air and boiling the very sand under their feet. At night, the temperature plummeted, the cold seeping into their bones. They traveled for days, a tiny caravan against an endless sea of dunes. It was during this journey, in the quiet, shared hardship, that the walls between Naruto and Nami began to truly crumble. One night, the crew was huddled around a small, crackling fire. Kale was meditating, Leo was trying to teach Karu a card trick, and Vivi was asleep, exhausted from the stress. Naruto and Nami sat a little apart, sharing a blanket against the biting cold, watching the stars. The sky here was different, clearer, the constellations alien to both of them. I've never seen so many stars, Nami said softly, her voice barely a whisper. You could map a dozen new skies out here. Back home, the sky wasn't always this clear, Naruto said, his gaze distant. Especially not at the end. He fell silent for a long moment. Nami didn't push, she just waited. There was a monster inside me, he finally said, the words coming out slowly, carefully. Sealed in me since I was born. Everyone hated me for it. Feared me. It was lonely. Nami looked at him. She saw not the demigod who had punched Arlong into orbit, but the ostracized child he must have been. It was a loneliness she understood all too well. He wasn't just a monster, though, Naruto continued. A faint smile on his lips. His name was Kurama. He was angry, and proud, and he had every right to be. But in the end, he became my friend. My first real friend, maybe. He was with me when I fell into this world. He looked down at his hands. This power I have now, this, Gear 5th, thing, it's loud. It's happy. But sometimes, it's too loud. I can't hear him anymore. I don't know if he's still in here. Or if he's gone. He tapped his chest. It's a different kind of lonely. Nami felt a pang in her chest. He was a universe of power, but he was also just a man who missed his friend. She thought about Belmere, about her sister Nojiko, about the life she had lost and the one she was just beginning to build. My dream, she said, finding herself wanting to share something of her own. To map the world, it started as an escape. If I could draw the whole world, understand it, then it couldn't hurt me. It couldn't trap me like Kokoyashi did. It was about control. She looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the starlight. But now, it's different. Seeing you, seeing what's possible, it's not about control anymore. It's about seeing it all. The good, the bad, the impossible. I want to draw a map that leads to a world like the one you talked about in Logatown. Her shoulder brushed against his under the blanket. The contact was electric, a small point of warmth against the vast, cold desert. He didn't pull away. You will, he said, his voice full of a simple, unwavering certainty that stole her breath. And I'll be there to carry your ink. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound. You'd be terrible at it. You'd probably spill it all. Probably, he admitted with a grin. But I'd try. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the shared vulnerability hanging between them. More intimate than any touch. She was no longer just his navigator, and he was no longer just her strange, powerful bodyguard. They were partners, confidants, two lost souls charting a new course together under a foreign sky. From a high, shadowed dune a mile away, Silas lowered a hand from his ear. He had used his power to create a focused, sound lens, allowing him to hear their whispered conversation as clearly as if he were sitting beside them. He noted the emotional bond, the shared history of pain and loneliness. To his master, Icarus, this would be logged as a psychological vulnerability. A leverage point. But even Silas, a man who saw the world in frequencies and vibrations, could not deny the resonant harmony between the two. It was a frequency he had never encountered before, and it was strong. Rainbase was an oasis of sin in the middle of the desert. A city built around a garish, golden casino, rain dinners, that rose into the sky like a monument to greed. Water flowed freely in fountains and canals, a deliberate, cruel mockery of the drought-stricken lands around it. This is it, Nami said, her voice tight. According to Vivi, Crocodile's office is on the top floor. But the real base is in a secret basement. All right, here's the plan, Naruto said, his eyes glinting with mischief. Vivi, you, Leo, and Kale cause a little trouble out here. Start a rumor that the rebellion has reached the city. Create a panic. Draw the Baroque Works agents out. Nami and I will go inside. What are you two going to do? Vivi asked, her face pale with nervousness. Nami smirked. Naruto is going to be a distraction. The best distraction, Naruto added, cracking his knuckles. The casino was a loud, chaotic symphony of ringing bells, shuffling cards, and desperate hopes. Naruto, with Nami on his arm, walked in like he owned the place. He strode up to the highest stakes craps table, threw a bag of berries on the felt that made the croupier's eyes bulge, and announced, "Let's play." What followed was not a game of chance. It was a masterpiece of cartoon physics. When Naruto rolled the dice, they bounced, spun, and hovered in the air before landing on the exact numbers he called out. When he played roulette, the ball would leap out of its track, run around the rim like a panicked mouse, and dive into the pocket he'd chosen. He wasn't cheating in a way anyone could prove. He was simply imposing his will on reality in the most blatant, hilarious way possible. A crowd gathered. He was winning, and winning, and winning. He was laughing, tossing chips to stunned onlookers, creating a vortex of joyous chaos on the casino floor. Security was called. They tried to grab him, but their hands slipped off his rubbery skin. They tried to corner him, but he stretched his neck up to the ceiling to look down on them. While all eyes were on Naruto's one-man circus, Nami slipped away, using a map Vivi had drawn from memory to find the secret entrance to the basement. Meanwhile, in a lavish, opulent office at the top of the casino, a man sat in shadow, a golden hook where his left hand should be. Sir Crocodile, warlord of the sea, listened to the panicked reports from his floor manager with a deep scowl. A man with rubbery skin is winning all our money and reality appears to be breaking around him. Are you drunk? Crocodile growled into the den mushi. Then he paused. Rubbery skin. He'd heard that description before, in a garbled report from Whiskey Peak about a run-in with Mr. 5, and it had been connected to the meddlesome princess. He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow. He's here. He descended not to the casino floor, but to the secret basement, a vast, cavernous room where a huge map of Alabasta was laid out. He found the door already open, and standing there, waiting for him, was Naruto. Nami was behind him, a nervous but determined look on her face. Well, Crocodile said, his voice a dry rasp. The pests have found the nest. I should thank you. It saves me the trouble of hunting you down in the desert. His cold, dead eyes fell on Naruto. So you're the one who's been disrupting my perfect plan. I'll admit, I'm curious. What kind of devil fruit makes a man so foolish? Not a fruit, Naruto said, his grin gone, replaced by a cold fury that mirrored Crocodile's own. He looked around at the dry, stale air, the arrogant warlord. Just a guy who really hates bullies who hide behind lies. Brave words, Crocodile sneered. He raised his right hand, and the sand on the floor began to swirl, rising to his command. But in my kingdom, words are as meaningless as the rain. Here, the sand is absolute. And I am the sand. His body dissolved into a swirling torrent of sand, which shot across the room towards Naruto. Desert Spada. A blade of sharpened, compacted sand formed, aimed to slice Naruto in half. Naruto didn't dodge, he just reached out and grabbed it. The sand blade hit his palm and stopped dead. Crocodile, his consciousness within the sand, felt it. It was like hitting a wall that was also somehow soft. The sand didn't flow around the hand, it was just held. Crocodile's form solidified a few feet away, a look of genuine shock on his face. What? How? Are you using Haki? Naruto looked at his hand, then back at Crocodile. Nope, I just thought it would be really funny if I could just grab you. He grinned, a wide, terrifying, reality-bending grin. And if I think it's funny, it happens. That statement, so utterly illogical, so contrary to every law of power Crocodile had ever known, unnerved him more than any display of strength. This wasn't a fighter, this was a living contradiction. Insolent brat, Crocodile roared, his composure cracking. He slammed his golden hook into the ground. This is my domain. He lunged, his right hand open, aiming to touch Naruto. I will dry you out until you are nothing but a withered husk. His hand, which could suck the moisture out of anything it touched, clamped onto Naruto's arm. Crocodile smirked in triumph. He expected a scream, the sight of flesh withering and cracking. Nothing happened. Naruto just stood there, letting the warlord hold his arm. If anything, Crocodile felt a surge of vitality flowing from the boy into him. It was overwhelming, like trying to drink a river. What is this? Crocodile gasped, pulling his hand back as if burned. Why aren't you drying up? I dunno, Naruto said with a shrug. Maybe I'm just too full of life. His Uzumaki heritage, the life force of a sage, the bow. Less energy of Nika, it made him anathema to Crocodile's power. He was a well that could not be emptied. Crocodile, for the first time in a very long time, felt a sliver of fear. His greatest weapons, his invulnerability and his dehydration, were useless. This changed everything. Then I will simply grind you into dust. He snarled, losing all pretense of composure. He became a raging sandstorm, filling the room, aiming to tear Naruto and Nami apart through sheer abrasive force. Nami screamed, shielding her eyes. But Naruto just laughed. The drums of liberation started to beat, faintly at first, then growing into a thunderous rhythm. His hair flickered white. You really don't get it, do you? Naruto's voice boomed from within the storm. You can't bury a guy who can just bounce back up. He inhaled, his chest expanding to the size of a barrel. Then he blew. It wasn't just air, it was a gale force wind of pure, joyful energy. The sandstorm was blasted apart, the individual grains sent scattering to the corners of the room, revealing Crocodile, solid and furious, in the center. Now, Naruto said, his form fully transformed, his white hair flowing like a divine fire, it's my turn. He began to gather energy in his hand. It wasn't the menacing purple of a normal Rasengan. It was a swirling sphere of brilliant, golden light, humming with a sound like 1,000 people laughing at once. It grew larger and larger, illuminating the entire basement, casting out the shadows. You wanted to steal their hope and sell it back to them as a kingdom of sand, Naruto said, his voice echoing with the power of a god. But you can't own hope. You can only share it. He shot upwards, punching clean through the ceiling. He didn't stop. He went through the casino floor, scattering tables and slot machines. Through the next floor, and the next, he burst through the roof of rain dinners, soaring high into the cloudless, night sky, the golden sphere in his hand now the size of a small house. Crocodile could only look up through the gaping hole in his empire. his face a mask of utter disbelief. "Here's a little something to wash away the dust," Naruto yelled from the heavens. Sun God's cleansing rain. He hurled the golden sphere. It didn't plummet. It detonated high in the atmosphere. It wasn't a violent explosion. It was a release of pure, positive energy, a shockwave of life and joy that rippled outwards for miles. The superheated, stagnant air that the dance powder factories had created for years was violently destabilized. Cold upper atmosphere air crashed down. And then, for the first time in 5 years, a drop of rain fell on Rainbase. Then another, and another. A gentle drizzle turned into a downpour. On the streets outside, the people who had been rioting in panic stopped and looked up. Their faces wet. They felt the rain. Real rain. Inside the ruined basement, Crocodile stood frozen as water dripped from the ceiling, turning the sand at his feet to mud. His kingdom, his perfect, dry kingdom of sand, was being washed away. His invincibility was gone. Naruto landed softly in front of him, his form returning to normal. He was just a blonde kid in a t-shirt again. But his eyes held the weight of his victory. "It's over, Crocodile," he said. The warlord just stared, his mind unable to process his total, ideological defeat. He had been beaten not by a stronger pirate, but by a concept he couldn't comprehend. He had been beaten by laughter and rain. As the crew made their escape from the chaotic, celebrating city, Silas watched from a distant rooftop, letting the rain soak his dark coat. He held a small, black Den Mushi, its eye closed as it recorded his report. Saint Icarus, his voice was a flat, clinical monotone. The target, Naruto Uzumaki, has been confirmed as an outside factor of the highest order. He is immune to Logia-class abilities through a method I can only describe as conceptual overwrite. He is immune to life-draining effects. His power directly counters and negates environmental control and psychological manipulation based on despair. He paused, watching the Dawnbreaker sail away from the now liberated coastline. Quote, "His primary threat is not his physical power, which is immeasurable, but his ability to inspire hope on a nationwide scale. He does not break his enemies, he breaks the systems they create. Standard engagement protocols are obsolete. This is not a target to be captured or killed. This is an idea that must be erased." He closed the connection, the weight of his words hanging in the newly cleansed air. The game had changed. Naruto Uzumaki wasn't just a powerful individual. He was a fundamental force of nature, and the world's self-proclaimed gods had just seen a glimpse of how utterly unprepared they were to face him. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sound of a Golden Bell. The journey from the scorched sands of Alabasta to their next destination was, by all accounts, insane. It involved chasing rumors of a knock-up stream, a colossal geyser-like eruption of seawater that shot straight into the sky. Most sailors dismissed it as a drunken fantasy. Nami, however, cross-referencing ancient sea charts with tidal patterns, believed it was real. Her conviction was so absolute that she had Naruto, Kale, and Leo spend 3 days modifying the Dawnbreaker, adding makeshift wings and reinforcing the hull. Kale had complained that he was a swordsman, not a carpenter, but had done the work with his usual grudging efficiency. When they finally found it, a monstrous pillar of water exploding from the ocean with the force of a volcano. Leo had fainted. Kale had just grunted, absurd. Naruto had simply laughed, the thrill of the unknown lighting up his face. Riding the knock-up stream was being fired from a cannon into a hurricane. The ship creaked and groaned, the wooden wings threatening to shear off. Nami was a dervish at the helm, screaming orders, her hair whipping wildly as she navigated the violent vertical torrent. Naruto, in his element, used his powers in a dozen small, crucial ways. He stretched his arms to become living ropes, lashing down their supplies. He turned He decked to rubber to absorb the worst of the shocks. He even inflated his head like a giant balloon to act as a rudder when their own snapped. They burst through a thick layer of clouds into a place that shouldn't exist. A sea in the sky. A vast, white ocean of dense cloud, with a brilliant blue sky stretching infinitely above it. In the distance, floating on the white sea, was an island made of earth and cloud. A land of impossible geography and ancient, jungle-covered ruins. Skypia, Nami breathed, her eyes wide with a map-maker's wonder. It's real. Leo, having just woken up, took one low, Okay at the sea of clouds and promptly fainted again. The air here was different. Lighter. Cleaner. Naruto took a deep breath, and a wide, serene smile spread across his face. He felt close. Close to the sun, close to the sky. The Nika power within him, the sun god aspect, hummed with a quiet, joyful resonance. It felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. Their arrival, however, was not peaceful. They were almost immediately accosted by a knight on a strange, bird-like creature, who declared them illegal immigrants and attacked. The fight was brief and confusing, ending when Naruto A.C. Sidentally bounced the knight's lance back with his rubbery stomach, knocking the man senseless. They soon learned they had entered a holy land, a place ruled by a powerful, tyrannical, god, named Enel. The parallels to Alabasta were immediate and chilling. A populace living in fear, a despot hoarding a vital resource, in this case, land, and a group of rebels, the Shandians, descendants of an ANC. Giant city's people, fighting a hopeless war to reclaim their home. But where Crocodile was a creature of shadow and conspiracy, Enel was a being of pure, arrogant light. They made their way to the Shandian camp, hidden deep within the upper yard, the island of Earth. There they met Wiper, the fiery and aggressive leader of the rebellion. He was deeply suspicious of them, seeing them as just more Blue Sea people, come to desecrate his homeland. Your fight is not with us, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, meeting Wiper's hostile glare without flinching. It's with the man who calls himself a god. Enel is a force of nature. Wiper spat. He hears all, sees all. He smites any who defy him with pillars of lightning from the heavens. You cannot fight lightning. Naruto just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that infuriated Wiper. Maybe you can't, but I've always been a little different. It was a declaration that would soon be put to the test. Enel, from his golden city of Shandora, had indeed heard them. He saw Naruto's smile as a personal affront to his divinity. And so, he passed judgment. Divine judgment, his voice boomed, seemingly from the sky itself. A massive, brilliant pillar of lightning, thick as a house, descended from the heavens, aimed directly at Naruto. The Shandians screamed and scattered. Nami, Kale, and a newly conscious Leo looked on in horror. Naruto! Nami shrieked. Naruto didn't move, he just looked up, tilting his head as the column of pure, destructive energy hurtled towards him. Whoa, he said, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. That's a big one. The lightning struck. There was a deafening crack that shook the entire island. The ground was scorched black in a 50-foot radius. The air smelled of ozone. When the light faded, there was nothing but a smoking crater where Naruto had been standing. Wiper stared, his face grim. I told you, no one can survive his judgment. Hey, the sound was faint, coming from the center of the crater. Hey. A figure sat up in the middle of the scorched earth, smoke curling off his body. His hair was stark white, flickering like a flame. The steam-like scarf of clouds wreathed his neck. His body was blackened with soot. His t-shirt vaporized, but he was completely unharmed. The drums of liberation began to beat, a slow, playful rhythm. That tickled, Naruto announced, a wide, manic grin splitting his face. He shook his head, dislodging a small, static spark from his ear. Everyone, Wiper, the Shandians, his own crew, stared in utter, jaw-dropping disbelief. But, how? Nami whispered, her mind so rooted in logic and science, failing to find an explanation. Naruto stood up, stretching his arms over his head with a comical scrowing. Rubber, Yano, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Lightning doesn't really work on me. It's just a lot of noise. In his golden city, Enel, who had been watching through his mantra, or observation hockey, felt his eternal smirk falter for the first time in years. He had just hit this man with enough voltage to incinerate a town, and he was laughing. Impossible, he whispered. What is he? Naruto looked up at the sky, in the general direction of Enel's throne. Hey, so-called God, he yelled, cupping his hands around his mouth. My turn. He crouched down, his hands pressed against the earth of the upper yard. His power flowed into the ground, not destructively, but playfully. The ancient, hard-packed dirt suddenly lost its rigidity. Far away, in the middle of Enel's opulent city, the ground beneath one of his 4 priests. The one called Satori suddenly turned to a bouncy, gelatinous mass. Satori, caught completely by surprise, was launched helplessly into the air, screaming. Naruto laughed, the sound echoing with the drumbeat in his chest. Let's play a game. It's called, The Floor is Lava. Except, rubbery. Enel's face contorted in a mask of fury. This wasn't a challenge. This was mockery. This, Blue Sea Devil, was not only immune to his power, he was turning his sacred land into a playground. Priests, everyone, find the Blue Sea dwellers and eliminate them. Enel commanded. This blasphemy ends now. Thus began the survival game, a chaotic battle across the upper yard. But it was a game Naruto was uniquely suited to win. Enel's priests, with their strange dials and bizarre trials, were no match for a man who rewrote the rules of reality on a whim. The ordeal of balls, a trial of 100 explosive spheres, became a frantic game of dodgeball where Naruto simply UGHT the balls and juggled them before tying the priest in charge up with his own stretched out limbs. The ordeal of iron, a trial of hidden weapons and traps, was thwarted when Naruto simply turned the ground into a soft, harmless cushion. While Naruto played his chaotic games, Nami, Kale, and Leo, guided by a repentant former god's knight named Gonfall, sought the truth of this land. They found the ruins of the ancient city of Shandora, and in its heart, a massive, golden bell. And on its base, an inscription. It was a message, written in the ancient language, from a man named Calgara to his friend, a Blue Sea explorer named Mont Blanc Noland. It spoke of their friendship, of a promise, and of the city's greatest treasure, the golden bell itself, meant to be rung to guide Noland back to the island. Nami looked up at the massive bell, perched atop a colossal beanstalk that had grown so large it had carried the city into the sky. Her navigator's soul, her historian's heart, ached at the story. This whole war, she whispered. The Shandians aren't fighting for land. They're fighting to ring this bell. To prove to the world, and to the ghost of their friend's ancestor, that their city wasn't a lie. They're fighting to fulfill a 400-year-old promise. It was a revelation that hit Naruto just as hard. When Nami told him, his playful demeanor vanished. A promise between friends. A legacy passed down through generations. A truth buried by lies and tyranny. It was a story he understood to his very core. A promise, he said, his voice soft but filled with a new, unshakable resolve. All right then, we're not just going to beat this Enel guy. We're going to ring that bell. So loud that their friends will hear it all the way back down in the Blue Sea. The final confrontation was inevitable. Naruto made his way to the giant jack, the colossal beanstalk, with the goal of reaching the bell. But Enel was waiting for him. The self-proclaimed god descended, his body crackling with lightning, his face a mask of divine rage. You have desecrated my land, defied my rule, and mocked my power, Enel said, floating before Naruto. For this, you will not just die. You will be erased. For a god. You talk way too much, Naruto replied, his white hair flickering. Gods don't need to tell people they're gods. People just know. He pointed a thumb at himself. For example, I'm the sun god. See, it just feels right. Enel screamed in fury and transformed. His body became a colossal being of pure electricity, a 100-foot-tall Raijin, a thunder god incarnate. I will show you the meaning of fear. 200 million volt Amaru. The giant lightning beast lunged at Naruto, its fists crackling with enough power to turn the island to glass. Naruto's response was to grow. He didn't just inflate a limb. His entire being swelled, his gear 5th power going into overdrive. He grew larger and larger, his cartoonish form matching Enel's Raijin state foot for foot. He became a giant, his white hair like a crown of clouds, his face fixed in a joyful, battle-hungry grin. Whoa, look at me, I'm huge, giant Naruto bellowed, his voice shaking the very clouds. The two titans clashed. It was a battle of myths. A thunder god against a sun god. Lightning versus rubber. Logic versus laughter. Enel's bolts of lightning, which could travel at the speed of light, were simply caught by Naruto's giant rubbery hands and tied into knots before being flicked away. Enel's spears of electricity were bent into funny shapes. This can't be. Enel roared from within his lightning form. I am lightning. I am invincible. Why can't I hurt you? Because you're not a real god, Naruto's voice boomed. You're just a bully with a strong devil fruit. You rule through fear. Real gods, he cocked back a fist the size of a battleship, rule by making people smile. But Enel had one last, desperate gambit. He abandoned his fight with Naruto and shot towards his flying arc, the Maxim. His plan was no longer to rule Skypia, but to destroy it. He activated the arc's ultimate weapon, the Reigo, a massive, swirling sphere of storm clouds and lightning designed to wipe the island from existence. If I cannot have this land, no one can, Enel shrieked, his god complex finally shattering into pure, nihilistic rage. The Reigo sphere grew, darkening the sky, crackling with apocalyptic power. Down below, everyone, Shandians, Skypians, Naruto's crew, looked up in terror. It was a storm that would swallow the world. Nami watched from the base of the giant jack, her face pale. This was a force of nature beyond her control, a weather pattern of pure destruction. But then she looked up at the giant, white-haired figure of Naruto, standing defiantly between the island and the storm. Naruto, you have to stop it, she yelled, her voice lost in the roaring wind. Giant Naruto looked down, first at the terrifying Reigo, then at the golden bell perched at the very top of the beanstalk. An idea, a crazy, wonderful, Naruto-esque idea, formed in his mind. He didn't fly towards the Reigo. He turned his back to it and began to climb the giant jack, his huge hands and feet finding easy purchase on the massive stalk. What is he doing? Wiper yelled. He's running away. No, he's not, Nami said, her eyes wide as she understood his insane plan. He's not running. He's aiming. Naruto reached the top of the beanstalk. He stood on the platform beside the massive golden bell. The Reigo was descending, a sphere of death ready to consume everything. Naruto turned to face it, and began to gather energy in his hand. It wasn't a normal Rasengan. He poured all of his sage energy, all of his life force, all of the joyful, liberating power of Nika into this one attack. A sphere of golden, swirling energy formed in his giant palm. It was blinding, a miniature sun born in the sky sea. It hummed with a sound that was both a devastating roar and a triumphant laugh. Hey, Enel, Naruto yelled, his voice carrying over the storm. You wanted to be a god. Fine. Then listen to this prayer. He didn't throw the golden Rasengan at the Reigo. He punched the bell. Gomu Gomu no, golden rifle. His fist, wreathed in the power of the sun, slammed into the side of the ancient golden bell. D-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O- of a 400-year-old promise being kept. A wave of pure, golden, sonic energy erupted from the bell, a ripple of hope made manifest. The sound wave, imbued with Naruto's reality-warping power, shot upwards and slammed into the Reigo. The effect was not destructive. It was purifying. The chaotic, dark electrical energy of the Reigo was completely neutralized, its rage soothed by the bell's golden song. The massive storm cloud didn't explode. It simply dissipated, fading away into harmless white vapor, revealing the clear blue sky above. The apocalypse was over, cancelled by a single, perfect note. The sound of the bell, however, continued. It rolled down from the sky, across the white sea, a clear, beautiful chime that spoke of friendship and endurance. And far, far below, on the island of Jaya in the blue sea, an old man named Mont Blanc Cricket, the descendant of Noland, was sitting on his porch, looking out at the sea. He and his crew had been diving for years, searching for the lost city of gold to clear his ancestor's name. They were called liars, fools, dreamers. Then he heard it, faint at first, then growing clearer, a sound coming from the sky above. A beautiful, golden chime. The song of Shandora. Tears streamed down Cricket's face. He wasn't a liar, he whispered, looking up at the sky. It was real. The city of gold, it was in the sky all along. The sound of the bell had reached him. The promise was fulfilled. On the silent sea a few miles below the knock-up stream's usual location, Silas sat in a small, black submarine of his own design. His expression was, for the first time, one of deep consternation. His Odo no Mi power allowed him to control and perceive all vibrations. He had felt the knock-up stream's eruption. He had tracked the Dawnbreaker's impossible ascent. He had been monitoring the island in the sky by analyzing the subtle atmospheric vibrations. He had felt the massive electrical discharge of Enel's power. It was a chaotic, high-frequency scream of energy. Then, he had felt something else. A pure, perfect frequency. A single, resonant tone of such impossible clarity and power that it had overloaded his senses, forcing him to clamp his hands over his ears. Even in his sound-proofed vessel, it was not a sound of destruction. It was a sound of creation, of resolution. It was the antithesis of his own power, which was rooted in negation and silence. The drums of liberation were a sound he could understand as a call to chaos. This bell, this was a sound of order. A sound of hope. It was a song, and it terrified him on a level he hadn't known he possessed. He sent his report to Icarus, his fingers trembling slightly as he tapped out the coded message. Target has faced a Logia user with godlike power over lightning. Target was immune. Target demonstrated macro-scale reality warping, including spontaneous gigantification. The engagement ended with the target weaponizing a concept, the fulfillment of a historical promise, to neutralize an extinction-level weather event. I repeat, he weaponized a story. He paused, trying to find the words to convey the true horror of what he had perceived. Saint Icarus, this is not a warrior. It is a narrative force. It does not defeat enemies, it resolves their stories. I do not believe a conventional weapon can stop him. We are not fighting a man. We are fighting a fairy tale. The message was sent. For the first time, Silas, the perfect hunter, felt a vibration he could not silence, his own fear. Back in Skypia, the celebrations were wild. Shandians and Skypians, enemies for generations, were now celebrating together. United by the miracle they had witnessed. Naruto, back to his normal size, was being hoisted on the shoulders of Wiper and Gonfall, a massive feast laid out before him. He eventually slipped away from the party, finding Nami standing by the edge of the island, looking down at the blue sea so far below. She had a piece of parchment in her hand, on which she was already sketching the coastlines of the Sky Islands. I can't believe it, she said, not turning as he approached. An ocean in the sky. A city of gold. A 400-year-old song. She finally looked at him, her yes shining with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It was more than awe, more than gratitude. It was a deep, profound connection. For a woman of science, you make it very hard to believe in simple physics. Hey, physics can be whatever you want it to be, he said with a grin. You just have to be convincing enough. She shook her head, a smile on her face. You're a living myth, Naruto Uzumaki. A fairy tale, like Silas said. Naruto's smile faded. Silas. Nami's expression turned serious. The sound guy. From Alabasta. He left us a message. I found it etched into the mast of the ship. A warning. She handed him a piece of paper on which she had copied the strange, vibrating script. It read, "The gods of this world do not tolerate pretenders. And they are watching." Naruto read the message, his face unreadable. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. This Silas, this Icarus, they were like the Akatsuki, shadows lurking in the periphery, convinced of their own righteousness. Let them watch, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. Let them send their hunters and their silent assassins. They'll find out what happens when you try to put a leash on the sun. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He looked at Nami, at the worry in her eyes. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of orange hair from her face. His touch was warm, gentle, and full of a silent promise. As long as I have my navigator, he said softly, I can handle a few angry gods. Her breath hitched. The space between them crackled with an unspoken energy, a gravity far stronger than the one that held this island in the sky. She felt an almost irresistible urge to close the distance, to lean into his warmth, his impossible certainty. Before she could, Leo came running up, his face flushed with excitement. Guys, the Shandians are giving us a bunch of gold from the city. We're rich. I can buy a whole island and tell stories all day. The moment was broken, but the feeling lingered. Nami stepped back, her heart beating a wild rhythm that had nothing to do with drums. We should get ready to go, she said, her voice a little unsteady. We need to figure out how to get down. Naruto grinned, the tension broken. Down. Why go down? He pointed to a massive, balloon-like octopus floating nearby. I bet we could tie that to the ship and just float. Nami stared at the octopus, then at Naruto's beaming face. She sighed, a long-suffering sound that was half exasperation, half affection. You're going to be the death of me, you know that. Nah, he said, bumping her shoulder playfully. I'm the one who's going to help you see the whole world. And we're just getting started. Looking at his smile, bright and boundless as the sun itself, she believed him. The journey ahead was terrifying, filled with silent hunters and angry gods. But with him, it also felt like the greatest adventure imaginable. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The City of Water and Whispers of a Demon. Getting down from Skypia was as chaotic and improvised as getting up. Naruto's idea of using a balloon octopus was, to Nami's eternal shock, partially successful. They had floated gently down through the sea of clouds. A surreal and peaceful descent, only for the octopus to get spooked by a flock of sky sharks and abruptly deflate. The Dawnbreaker, now laden with a frankly irresponsible amount of gold from the grateful Shandians, had plummeted the last few thousand feet towards the blue sea. It had taken all of Naruto's reality-bending power, turning the ship into a giant, rubbery parachute at the last second. To save them from becoming a very wealthy shipwreck, they landed in the waters of the Grand Line with a massive SPLOOSH, rocking a nearby ship. That ship, as fate would have it, belonged to the Foxy Pirates. And what followed was a bizarre, confusing, and utterly one-sided, Davy-back fight, that Naruto won by turning the entire race course into a bouncy castle and winning all 3 events in under a minute. He'd won Foxy's entire crew, but after one look at their pathetic state, he'd given them back, an act of mercy that Foxy found more humiliating than any defeat. Now, they were approaching their next destination. A city Nami had been dreaming of visiting, Water 7. The City of Water, she breathed, her eyes scanning the metropolis that rose from the waves like a colossal fountain. They say the greatest shipwrights in the world are here. We have the gold. We can finally get a real ship, Naruto. A proper vessel, built for the new world. Something worthy of our journey. There was an almost reverent tone in her voice. To Nami, a ship wasn't just wood and nails. It was freedom, it was potential, it was home. The Dawnbreaker had served them well, but it was a temporary fix. A relic of their East Blue beginnings. They needed a vessel forged for the legends they were becoming. Naruto leaned on the railing beside her, sharing her awe. The city was a marvel of engineering, a tiered cake of canals, bridges, and ingenious water lifts. It's beautiful, he admitted. Looks like they figured out how to work with the water instead of fighting it. Exactly. Nami's eyes shone. We need to find the Galila Company. Their president, Iceberg, is a genius. They say he's the best of the best. The welcome they received was far from ideal. The moment they docked, a boisterous group of dismantled shipwrights with strange square pants, led by a cyborg in a Speedo, swarmed their ship. This was the Frankie family. Their leader, Frankie, took one look at their piles of gold and declared he was confiscating 200 million berries. The confrontation was unique. Naruto, honoring his promise to Nami to avoid large-scale, reality-breaking fights, decided to handle it differently. When Frankie's men charged, Naruto simply stretched his leg, tripping their leader. He then grabbed Frankie in a rubbery, inescapable hug, declaring him his new best friend, and refused to let go. Much to the cyborg's rage and confusion, the fight devolved into a ridiculous scene of Frankie trying to blast Naruto off with his coup de vent, while Naruto just absorbed the impact with a cheerful, "Whoa, Windy." The chaos was interrupted by the arrival of the Galila shipwrights. Kaku and Lucci, 2 of their foremen, assessed the Dawnbreaker's damage from the fall from Skypia. Their verdict was grim. The keel was shattered beyond repair. The ship was dying. The news hit Nami like a physical blow. She loved that little ship. It was the vessel that had carried her away from a life of servitude and into a world of adventure. Naruto put a comforting hand on her shoulder, his earlier cheerfulness gone, replaced by a quiet empathy. But their troubles were only just beginning. That night, the city's hero, Mayor Iceberg, was attacked in his mansion. The culprits were described as a man with a long nose and a dark-haired woman. The description, however vague, was close enough. Suddenly, the entire city of Water 7, a place renowned for its warmth and camaraderie, turned on them. The Frankie family, believing the Straw Hats had hurt their city's beloved mayor, became openly hostile. The Galila Company, fiercely loyal to Iceberg, declared them enemies. "This is wrong," Nami insisted, her voice tight with frustration as they huddled in the run-down hotel they'd managed to secure. "We were all here when it happened. It's a frame-up. A professional one," Kale added, his hand never straying from his sword. "The rumors are spreading too fast, too uniformly. It's coordinated. But who would do this? And why?" Leo wondered aloud, nervously polishing a steel pachinko ball. "We just got here." Naruto was silent, his eyes closed. He was extending his senses, not his sage mode, but the faint hum of Nika's power, feeling the emotional currents of the city. He felt fear, anger, and betrayal. But underneath it, like a discordant note in a symphony, he felt something else. A cold, disciplined, emotionless presence. Several of them. They were hidden, scattered throughout the city, but they vibrated at a frequency that felt chillingly familiar. It was the same dead zone feeling he'd gotten from Silas. "It's the world government," Naruto said, his voice low and certain. "Their secret police. Cipher Pol." The name hung in the air, heavy and cold. "Why?" Nami asked. "What do they want with us? Or with Iceberg?" "I don't know," Naruto admitted. "But this isn't about us getting into trouble. Trouble was brought to our doorstep. We can't run from this." His gaze ardent with a decisiveness that commanded the room. "We can't fight the whole city. Brute force is useless here. We need the truth. Kale, Leo, I want you to spread out. Don't engage anyone. Just listen. Find out where the real attackers are. Nami, I need you to be our eyes and ears. Get a map of this city's underbelly, the secret passages, the old waterways. Find us a way to move without being seen. I'm going to pay a visit to Frankie. You're going to see the guy who wants to beat you up." Leo asked, bewildered. "He's not our enemy," Naruto stated. "He loves this city. The people who attacked Iceberg are his enemy, too. He just doesn't know it yet." Naruto's lips curved into a wry smile. "Besides, I think he and I will get along just fine. We're both kind of super." Naruto found Frankie at the dismantling yard, brooding over the Dawnbreaker, which his men had dragged ashore. The cyborg was surprisingly sentimental about ships, and he was mourning the caravel's imminent demise. "You again," Frankie grunted, turning around. "I should have known you'd come crawling back for your gold." "The gold can wait," Naruto said, his tone disarmingly friendly. He walked over and patted the hull of the Dawnbreaker. "She was a good ship." Frankie was taken aback by the genuine sentiment. "Yeah, she was. Fought hard to stay together on the way down. Had a lot of heart. You love this city, don't you?" Naruto asked, changing the subject. Frankie's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" "The people who attacked Iceberg, they're not me or my crew," Naruto said simply. "And they're not just random thugs. They're professionals. The kind that frame people to create chaos. The kind that don't care about shipwrights or cities or cyborgs in speedos. And I'm supposed to just believe you?" Frankie scoffed. "No," Naruto said. "You're supposed to be smart. You're a genius, right? A guy who can turn himself into a walking weapon. You know tools. You know designs. Look at the attack on Iceberg. It was precise. It was planned. It was meant to turn everyone against us. Does that sound like a bunch of upstart pirates who just fell out of the sky?" Frankie was silent. Naruto's logic was sound. It cut his anger and hit the core of his intelligence. "The real enemies are still out there," Naruto continued. "And they're going to make another move. When they do, who are you going to side with? The liars hiding in the shadows? Or the guy who's telling you the truth to your face?" Naruto didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, leaving Frankie alone with his thoughts and the dying ship. Naruto hadn't fought him. He hadn't threatened him. He had respected his intelligence, appealed to his love for his city, and planted a seed of doubt that would soon bear fruit. His charisma wasn't a magic spell. It was an unwavering belief in the good sense of others, a weapon far more potent than any punch. The situation escalated dramatically that night. The real culprits, a group of shadowy figures, attacked the Galila headquarters again. This time, they revealed themselves. It was Lucci, Kaku, and two other Galila shipwrights, Khalifa and Bluno. They were agents of Cipher Pol 9, the government's most secret and powerful assassination unit, operating undercover for years. Their mission? To retrieve the blueprints for the ancient weapon Pluton, which they believed Iceberg possessed. The battle was swift and brutal. The Galila shipwrights, betrayed and outmatched, were cut down. Iceberg was captured, and in the chaos, another member of Naruto's crew was implicated, Nico Robin, who had been seen with the CP9 agents. She had vanished, leaving behind a single, cryptic message, "I'm sorry." Naruto and his crew watched from a distant rooftop, Nami having guided them air through the city's labyrinthine canals. They saw the flash of fighting, heard the screams. They saw Robin standing with their enemies. She betrayed us. Leo stammered, his voice filled with disbelief. No, Naruto said instantly. His voice a low, dangerous growl. He was watching Robin's face through a pair of binoculars. He saw her expression. It wasn't the look of a traitor. It was the look of someone sacrificing themselves. It was the same look he'd seen on countless faces in his own world, the look of someone choosing the lesser of two impossible evils. They have something on her. They're forcing her. The CP9 agents, with Robin and a captured Frankie who had come to investigate and been caught in their net, made their way to the train station. The C train, the Puffing Tom, was their escape route to the government's judicial island, Eni's lobby. "We have to stop them," Nami said, her face pale but resolute. "We have to get Robin back. They're not just agents. They're monsters," Kale observed, his knuckles white where he gripped his sword. "That man, the one with the pigeon, Lucci. His presence, it's like a coiled beast." "Then we'll be bigger monsters," Naruto said, his eyes glowing with a faint golden light. He looked at Nami. "Get us to that station. Fast." The chase to the station was a blur. But as they neared the tracks, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. He was tall and ascetic, dressed in a simple black coat. His eyes were devoid of all emotion. "Naruto Uzumaki," the man said, his voice flat and toneless, yet it seemed to suck the sound from the air around it. Naruto stopped. He knew this presence. "Silas," he said, the name tasting like ash. "My master, Saint Icarus, is disappointed," Silas continued, as if discussing the weather. "He had hoped you would be more discreet. Instead, you have made a mockery of a warlord and defied a god. You are becoming a narrative he can no longer control." "Get out of my way," Naruto growled. "His friends lives on the line. I don't have time for you." "That is the point," Silas said. He raised a hand. "I am here to ensure you run out of time." He clapped his hands together. But instead of a sound, there was a profound and terrifying absence. A sphere of absolute silence erupted from him, expanding to cover a 2-block radius. The distant chugging of the C train, the panicked shouts of the city, the frantic beating of Nami's heart, it all vanished. The world became a silent film. Even the drums of liberation in Naruto's chest faltered. The joyful, chaotic rhythm stuttered, dampened by the oppressive stillness. The white, steamy vapor around his neck flickered and thinned. "What is this?" Nami mouthed, her eyes wide with panic. "My Oto no mi," Silas's voice sounded directly in their minds, a chilling, telepathic intrusion. The sound fruit. In this zone of silence, there are no vibrations. No sound. No echo. The very air is dead. Your power, which relies on a heartbeat, a drum, is neutered here. Naruto felt it. His gear fifth felt sluggish, unresponsive. The cartoonish reality warping felt like trying to swim through molasses. The joy that few led it was being smothered by the absolute, profound quiet. "This is your weakness, sun god," Silas's voice echoed in his head. "You are a creature of sound and fury. I am the silence that swallows it." Silas moved. He was fast, his movements economical and deadly. He flowed towards Nami, a blade appearing in his hand. Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He abandoned the struggling gear fifth and dropped into a low stance, his body flooding with the calm, potent energy of the natural world. The orange pigmentation of sage mode flared around his eyes. If Silas was the absence of vibration, Sage Mode was the ultimate sensitivity to it. In the silent world, Naruto could still feel the subtle shift of Silas's feet on the cobblestones, the displacement of air as he moved, the faint hum of his own bioelectricity. He intercepted the attack, his hand catching Silas's wrist. The zone of silence didn't affect his raw physical strength or his connection to nature. "You're not the only one with a trick." Naruto's voice sounded in Silas's mind, a testament to his own powerful will. The fight that followed was surreal. A silent ballet of lethal grace. Naruto, unable to use his most powerful, reality-bending abilities, was forced to rely on pure shinobi combat, taijutsu, speed, and the precognitive abilities of Sage Mode. He was a blur of motion, his attacks precise and powerful. Silas was his equal in speed and skill, a master assassin. His silence was a weapon, disorienting Naruto's crew and forcing Naruto to fight on an unfamiliar footing. He would create small pockets of sound to distract, a sudden, jarring noise to his left, while attacking from the right. He was a master of sensory warfare. Naruto, however, was a veteran of 100 impossible battles. He adapted. He began to use the silence to his advantage. His own movements becoming whisper quiet, his attacks coming from unpredictable angles. He formed a Rasengan, but without the roaring sound, it was a silent, spinning sphere of death. Even more terrifying for its quietness. He slammed the silent Rasengan into the ground, the force of it creating a massive shockwave that, even without sound, was powerful enough to disrupt Silas's footing and shatter the street. "My power comes from joy," Naruto's voice echoed in Silas's mind, full of a cold fury. "But don't mistake that for weakness. I learned to fight in a world of silence and sorrow long before I ever heard any drums." He pressed his attack, his movements a whirlwind. He was no longer just defending, he was overwhelming. Silas, for all his skill and his power's unique advantage, was facing a warrior with a deeper well of experience and a more versatile arsenal. He was an assassin, but Naruto was a one-man army. The puffing Tom's whistle suddenly pierced the silence. It was leaving the station. Robin was on it. Naruto's head snapped towards the sound. That momentary distraction was all Silas needed. He didn't press the attack. He retreated, melting back into the shadows from which he came. "The data is sufficient," Silas's voice whispered a final time in Naruto's mind. "You can be harmed. You can be distracted. Your emotional attachments are a vulnerability we can and will exploit. Today, you lose a friend. Soon, you will lose everything." The zone of silence collapsed. Sound rushed back in, a deafening wave. The train's whistle was now a more NFUL cry as it pulled away from the city. Naruto stood panting, not from exhaustion, but from fury. He had been held up, toyed with, and while he was fighting, Robin had been taken. The failure was a physical pain, a sharp echo of every time he had been too late, too weak. "Nami," he yelled, his voice raw. Nami was already moving, her mind racing. "There's another C train, a prototype. Frankie was building it. If we can get to his hideout, then let's go." Naruto roared. He would not fail again. They raced to the Frankie house, where they found the Frankie family beaten and broken by CP9. But their spirit was not. When they learned that their leader, Frankie, had also been taken, an alliance was forged in the fires of shared purpose. The shipwrights, now knowing the truth, joined them. The entire city, it seemed, was now behind them. They found the prototype C train, the Rocketman. It was unfinished, unstable, and ridiculously fast. Without a moment's hesitation, they all piled in, Naruto, his crew, the galley foreman, and the entire Frankie family, and launched the train onto the tracks. The Rocketman shot across the sea, a metal bullet chasing the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Eni's lobby, the island of justice from which no one had ever returned, was their destination. On the deck of the speeding train, the wind whipping at them, Naruto stood at the prow, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fight with Silas had been a chilling reminder of the enemy they faced. An enemy that was intelligent, strategic, and utterly ruthless. An enemy that saw his friends not as people, but as levers to be pulled. Nami came and stood beside him, her hand gripping the railing tightly. "We'll get her back, Naruto." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. He didn't look at her. He said, "My attachments were a vulnerability. He's wrong, she said fiercely, her voice rising above the wind. They're your strength. They're our strength. It's why we're all on this train. It's why a whole city of shipwrights is ready to go to war for us. He doesn't understand that, and that's why he'll lose. Naruto finally looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unwavering belief. She wasn't just his navigator anymore. She was his anchor, his compass in the storm of his own power and the chaos of this new world. She was the one who reminded him not just where to go, but why he was going there. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, a small, solid point of contact in a world hurtling towards war. Yeah, he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He has no idea who he's messing with. The train sped on, carrying its cargo of rage and loyalty towards an island fortress. The whispers of a demon had given way to the roar of an impending battle. And the sun god was about to bring a very personal and very painful dawn to the doorstep of the world government. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Flames of Liberation. Eni's lobby was not a place of justice. It was a monument to the world government's absolute, unyielding power. A fortress island, perpetually bathed in daylight, connected to the outside world by a single, massive bridge called the Bridge of Hesitation. It was a place designed to crush the spirit long before it broke the body. Prisoners were marched across that bridge to the towering gates of justice, a final threshold beyond which lay only the crushing despair of impelled down or a shallow grave. The Rocketman, a train powered by Fury and Cola, crashed through the outer gates of the island like a cannonball, scattering the first wave of Marine Guards. The impromptu army, the Straw Hats, the Frankie family, and the Galley La Foreman, spilled out onto the island, a chaotic, determined force ready to wage war for the sake of two captured friends. Naruto stood at the forefront, his eyes scanning the island. He saw the thousands of soldiers, the fortified towers, the imposing courthouse, and beyond it all, the Tower of Justice where Robin and Frankie were being held. He could feel her, a faint flicker of terror and resignation. He could also feel them. The 8 agents of CP9, their life signatures cold and sharp like shards of glass. And he felt something else. A familiar, hateful vibration. Silas. The silent hunter was here, watching, waiting. The thought sent a jolt of cold fury through him. Spandam, the sniveling, incompetent director of CP9, appeared on a balcony of the courthouse, flanked by the masked assassins. He held a struggling Robin by the arm, a smug, cruel sneer on his face. Fools! Spandam shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. You dare attack Eni's lobby? This is the heart of the world government. You are not pirates. You are insects, challenging the very sky. He laughed, a high-pitched, grating sound. And you, Nico Robin, your friends have come for you. A pity they'll only get to watch you be dragged through the gates of justice. Robin looked down at her friends, at the small army that had come to defy the world for her. Her face was a mask of despair. No, she whispered, her voice choked. Go back. You can't fight them. You can't fight the world. The world, Naruto called out, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through Spandam's tirade. It wasn't a shout, but it carried an authority that silenced the entire island. Every soldier, every agent, turned to look at him. If this is your world, then we don't want any part of it. He turned to Leo, who was standing beside him, slingshot at the ready. Leo, on it, the sharpshooter replied, his usual nervousness gone, replaced by a grim focus. He loaded a special projectile into his slingshot, a small, flammable pellet. Naruto pointed towards the massive flag flying from the top of the courthouse. Chi was the symbol of the world government, 5 circles representing the 4 blue seas and the Grand Line, united under a single authority. Burn that thing down. Spandam's jaw dropped. The CP9 agents stiffened. The soldiers on the ground gasped in horror. To attack the flag was not just an act of defiance. It was a declaration of war against the entire world. You wouldn't dare. Spandam stammered. Leo fired. The pellet flew true, a tiny speck arcing through the sky. It struck the flag, and with a whoosh, the symbol of global order burst into brilliant orange flames. The sight of their burning flag sent a shockwave of disbelief through the government forces. It was an act of sacrilege so profound that for a moment, no one knew how to react. Naruto turned his gaze back to Robin, his eyes blazing with a protective fire. "Robin," he yelled, his voice echoing across the island. "We haven't heard it from you yet. Say you want to live." His words struck her harder than any physical blow. For 20 years, she had been running, hiding, believing her very existence was a sin. She had been taught that her life was forfeit, that wanting to live was a crime she was not allowed to commit. But looking at Naruto, at Nami, at Kale, at the army of misfits who had just declared war on the entire planet for her sake, something inside her broke. The dam of a lifetime of pain and self-loathing shattered. Tears streamed down her face. She leaned over the railing, her voice a raw, desperate scream that came from the very depths of her soul. "I want to live." Naruto's face split into a wide, brilliant grin. It was a smile that promised violence, liberation, and a happy ending, all at once. "You heard her," he said, cracking his knuckles. He looked at his allies. "Let's go get our friend back." And then, all hell broke loose. "It's a festival," Naruto declared, his hair flashing white as the drums of liberation kicked in, a thunderous, joyful war beat. He didn't just run towards the enemy, he bounced. He stomped his foot, turning the stone courtyard into a massive trampoline, launching the entire Frankie family and the Galila shipwrights over the heads of the frontline soldiers and directly into the fray. The battle for Eni's lobby was not a conventional war. It was a symphony of chaos conducted by a mad god. Naruto was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of white hair and joyous destruction. He saw a line of riflemen taking aim and stretched his lips, catching all their bullets in his teeth before spitting them back out like seeds, disarming them without killing a single one. He saw a giant, Oimo, swinging a massive club, and with a grin, he turned the club into a bouquet of flowers. He wasn't just fighting, he was liberating. He was turning a battle into a farce, dismantling the authority of the world government not with fear, but with laughter. The soldiers, trained for disciplined warfare, had no idea how to combat an enemy who could turn their cannons into RTY horns and their swords into balloon animals. While Naruto created a massive, chaotic diversion, the rest of the crew charged towards the courthouse, each facing one of the CP9 agents. Kale engaged the swordsman, Kaku. Nami, using her new and improved Kleem attack, faced the bubble using Khalifa. Leo and Frankie teamed up against the bizarre, zipper-mouthed Fukuro. Each battle was a desperate struggle, pushing them to their absolute limits. Naruto's main target was the bridge. The bridge of hesitation. It was the only escape route, and he had to secure it. He bounded towards it, only to find his path blocked by Bluno, the bartender-like agent who used the Doa Doa no Mi to create doors on any surface. "You will go no further," Bluno said, his expression stoic. "I love doors," Naruto replied cheerfully. "They're great for knock-knock jokes." He didn't even slow down. Bluno created an air door, a portal in the very atmosphere, intending for Naruto to run into it and be sent to another dimension. Naruto just grabbed the edges of the air door as if it were a picture frame, stretched it wide, and wore it like a necklace. "Neat trick," he said, his head popping out the other side. He then ran straight through Bluno, his rubbery body passing harmlessly through the agents, before snapping back and sending Bluno flying with a comical thwong. He reached the bridge, but thousands of Marine soldiers and officers were already swarming it, a veritable army summoned from the nearby Marine HQ. They were led by 5 vice admirals, powerful hockey users who had come to oversee the transfer. One man against 10,000 soldiers and 5 vice admirals. One of the vice admirals scoffed. "He's insane." Naruto stood at the entrance to the bridge, a lone figure against an army. He just grinned. The odds seem about right. He put his hands on the ground, and his power surged, not into the soldiers, but into the bridge itself. The entire, miles-long stone structure began to undulate, to lose its rigidity. It became a colossal, unstable bouncy castle. The soldiers, caught by surprise, lost their footing, bouncing uncontrollably, their perfect formations dissolving into a flailing, screaming mob. "Welcome," Naruto announced, his voice booming over the chaos, "to the funhouse of freedom." He leapt onto the bridge, bouncing from one spot to another, a blur of motion. The vice admirals, masters of hockey, tried to predict his movements, but they couldn't. His bouncing was random, chaotic, joyful. He wasn't following any pattern. He was simply having fun. He appeared before one vice admiral and poked him in the nose. The man, a giant famed for his iron will, promptly fell asleep. He dodged a slash from another, grabbed the blade, and tied it into a pretzel. "You should get that looked at," he advised. He moved through the army not as a warrior, but as a force of nature, sowing confusion and helplessness without malice. He was winning a war without throwing a single lethal punch. This display of overwhelming, non-lethal power was being broadcast to the world. Spandam, in his panic, had inadvertently activated a visual Den Mushi that was linked to the Sabayati archipelago. The world was watching as a single, laughing man dismantled the might of Eni's lobby. High in the Tower of Justice, Rob Lucci watched the chaos on the bridge, his face an impassive mask. The pigeon on his shoulder, Hattori, cooed nervously. Lucci was different from the others. He felt no panic, no confusion. He was a predator, and all he saw was a challenge. He had served the world governments, dark justice, his whole life. Killing without remorse, without question. This laughing god, this embodiment of joyful justice, was an ideological affront to his very existence. "Let him play," Lucci murmured, his voice a low growl. "His real fight is with me." Meanwhile, a different kind of battle was taking place in the shadows of the tower. Nami, separated from the others, found herself cornered. Khalifa was defeated, but a squadron of elite marine officers had her trapped. She was out of tricks, her Klima attack nearly depleted. Just as they were about to move in, a wave of palpable silence washed over the area. The officers froze, their expressions going slack, their eyes glazing over. They stood like statues, their aggression and will completely drained. Silas stepped out from behind a pillar. His face as emotionless as ever. He ignored the frozen Marines and looked at Nami. "You," he said, his voice the only thing audible in the deadened air. "The navigator. You were the locus of his emotional vulnerability. The anchor for his attachments." Nami stood her ground, her heart hammering, but her eyes blazing with defiance. "Get away from me. My master, Saint Icarus, has a message for you," Silas continued. Taking a step closer. "He is a collector of rare things. Art, artifacts, people. He finds your mind intriguing. He believes a spirit like yours should not be wasted on a fool's crusade. He offers you a place, wealth, security, the resources to map the entire world, under his protection." "Go to hell," Nami spat. Silas's expression didn't change. A predictable response. Pity. He raised a hand, and the silence around them intensified, pressing in on Nami, making her feel dizzy, nauseous. It was an attack on her very spirit. "Then I will simply remove you." Without his anchor, the sun god will become untethered. A pure force of chaos. He will burn himself out, and my master's world will be safe. Just as the silence threatened to crush her, a brilliant golden light filled the hallway. The oppressive stillness shattered, replaced by a warmth that felt like the first sunbeam after a long winter. Naruto stood at the end of the hall, his form back to normal. But his eyes glowing with a terrifying, golden incandescence. He had felt the signature of Silas's power near Nami, and he had abandoned the bridge, leaving the army in a state of bouncing disarray, to come here. "You," Naruto snarled, the sound a low, guttural promise of violence. "You don't touch her, ever." The air around Naruto began to shimmer, not with joy, but with pure, unadulterated rage. The Nika power was still there, but it was being twisted by his fury. This wasn't the playful sun god. This was the anger of a deity whose sacred ground had been trespassed. Silas felt it. The vibe, ration of Naruto's anger was a discordant, screaming frequency that grated against his own power. For the first time, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. He had come to exploit a weakness, but he had instead triggered a strength of an entirely different kind. "The data is noted," Silas said, already fading back into the shadows. "Rage is also a vulnerability." "Running away again," Naruto roared, lunging forward, his arm stretching to an impossible length to grab the fleeing assassin. But his hand passed through nothing. Silas was gone. Naruto stood there, trembling with rage, the golden light slowly receding. Nami rushed to his side, placing a hand on his arm. "Naruto, I'm okay," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He didn't hurt me." Look at me. He looked at her, his furious gaze slowly softening as he focused on her face. He saw she was safe, and the storm inside him began to calm. He tried to. He said. I know what he said, she interrupted. He's a liar and a monster. Don't listen to him. Don't let him get in your head. That's what he wants. She squeezed his arm. We have to get Robin. That's what matters. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in her presence. She was right. He had let his anger get the better of him, let Silas play him. He nodded, his resolve hardening once more. Yeah, let's go. They raced to the Tower of Justice, joining the others just as Frankie, in a moment of heroic defiance, burned the Pluton blueprints, ensuring they would never fall into the government's hands. Now, all that was left was the final confrontation. Naruto found Lucci waiting for him in a desolate passage leading to the gates of justice. Robin was just beyond, being dragged away by Spandam. So, the jester finally arrives, Lucci said, his voice a low purr. He cracked his neck. I have killed for the world government since I was a child. My justice is absolute. It is the necessary darkness that maintains order. Your light is a chaotic anomaly that must be extinguished. Your justice is just an excuse to be a monster, Naruto retorted, his knuckles cracking. You enjoy the killing. I can feel it. Lucci smiled, a true, chilling smile. Of course, the weak do not deserve to live. He blurred, his Soru technique carrying him behind Naruto in an instant. The strong survive. His finger, hardened like a bullet, jabbed towards Naruto's back. Shigen, the attack, which could pierce steel, simply bounced off Naruto's rubbery back with a dull thump. Naruto didn't even turn around. Too slow. He spun, his legs stretching and sweeping in a wide arc, forcing Lucci to leap back. The fight began in earnest. It was a clash of titans, a battle of apex predators. Lucci, in his leopard hybrid zone form, was a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and mastery of the six powers. He was impossibly fast, brutally strong, a perfect killing machine. But Naruto was a god. Lucci's Rankyaku, blades of compressed air, were simply dodged by Naruto's body bending into impossible shapes. Lucci's Tekai, an iron-hard defense, was shattered by Naruto's punches, which carried the cartoonish, reality-warping force of his will. The fight tore the tower apart. Lucci was astounded. He was landing blows that should have killed Naruto 10 times over, but the blonde was just laughing, his body absorbing, stretching, and bouncing back from every attack. Why won't you break? Lucci roared, his composure finally cracking. He unleashed his ultimate attack, the Rokuogen, a shockwave of internal energy that bypassed external defenses. It slammed into Naruto's chest. Naruto was thrown back, skidding across the floor. He coughed, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He'd felt that one. Finally, Lucci panted, a little pain. Naruto wiped the blood from his lip and grinned, a feral, terrifying expression. Yeah, that was a good one. He bounced back to his feet. But you hurt my friends. You made Robin cry. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. And for that, you don't get a fun fight. You just get to lose. He vanished. He moved with a speed that made Lucci's Soru look like slow motion. He appeared in front of the leopard man and delivered a single, devastating punch to the gut. It wasn't a reality-bending, cartoonish punch. It was a pure, concentrated strike, filled with all the righteous anger he felt for Robin's suffering. Lucci's eyes bulged. The air was driven from his lungs. His Tekai shattered. His zone form flickered. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying back, crashing through wall after wall after wall, until he finally came to a stop in a heap of rubble. Unconscious and broken, the strongest agent in the history of CP9 had been defeated. At that moment, the Buster Call began. A fleet of marine warships, summoned by Spandam's incompetence, appeared on the horizon and began to bombard Eni's lobby, ordered to destroy the island and everyone on it, friend and foe alike. Chaos reigned. The crew, battered but victorious, grabbed Robin and raced for the bridge. The very island collapsing around them. Their only hope for escape was the Going Merry, their first ship, thought to be lost at sea. In a final, miraculous act of will, the Mary had sailed herself through the storm to save them. They leapt from the crumbling bridge into the sea, landing on the deck of their beloved, dying ship. They were safe. They were together. Amidst the explosions of the Buster Call, with Eni's lobby burning behind them, Naruto and Nami found each other on the deck. They were covered in soot and grime, bruised and exhausted, but they were grinning. "You're a reckless, insane, impossible idiot," she said, her voice hoarse but full of an emotion that made his heart ache. "But you navigated us right into the heart of it," he replied, his own grin wide and triumphant. The tension, the fear, the adrenaline of the past few days, it all snapped. She stepped forward, stood on her toes, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, and deeply certain. It tasted of salt, smoke, and victory. It was a kiss that said, "We survived. We won. We're here." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, returning the kiss with all the pent-up emotion he had. In a world that was literally on fire, in the heart of a maelstrom of their own making, they found a moment of perfect, unshakable peace. As the Going Merry sailed away from the flames, carrying the crew that had defied the world, a new bounty poster was already being drafted at Marine HQ. It showed a picture of a laughing, white-haired Naruto, captured from the Sabayati broadcast. And underneath it, a new name and a new number, one that would send shockwaves across the 4 seas. Naruto Uzumaki, the Sun God, wanted, dead or alive, for 500 million berries. A new emperor had just declared his arrival on the world stage. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Shadow of the Sun. The aftermath of Eni's lobby was a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. They had won. They had defied the world and rescued their friend. But it had come at a cost. The Going Merry, their first true home, had finally succumbed to her injuries. In a solemn, tear-filled ceremony under the stars, they gave her a Viking funeral, setting her ablaze and sending her back to the sea she so loved. Naruto, who had only known the ship for a fraction of its life, felt the crew's grief as if it were his own. His hand finding Nami's in the darkness, a silent offering of shared sorrow. Their return to Water 7 was that of conquering heroes. Iceberg, recovering from his injuries, had declared them friends of the city. Frankie, using the 200 million berries he'd initially confiscated, along with the treasure from Skypia, agreed to build them a new ship. A vessel forged Fr. Owned the rare and impossibly strong atom wood, a ship worthy of a crew that wars with the world. The days of construction were a much-needed respite. Leo regaled the city's children with wildly exaggerated tales of their battles. Kale found a quiet dojo and spent his days in silent, meditative sparring. Nami pored over blueprints with Frankie and Iceberg, her brilliant navigational mind contributing to the new ship's design, ensuring it was not just strong, but smart. Naruto, for his part, found himself a quiet observer. He watched his friends laugh, work, and heal. He saw Robin, now truly part of the crew, smile a genuine, relaxed smile for the first time. The victory at Eni's lobby hadn't just been a battle, it had solidified them. They were no longer a collection of individuals traveling together. They were a family, forged in fire. But a shadow lingered. The new bounty posters had arrived. Sun God, Naruto, 500 million. Cat Burglar, Nami, 66 million. Demon Blade, Kale, 130 million. King of Liars, Leo, 30 million. And, Devil Child, Nico Robin, 80 million. They were no longer just rookies. They were a significant, recognized threat. An Emperor-class crew, the papers were calling them, due to the sheer scale of Naruto's power and the audacity of their actions. One afternoon, as Naruto sat on the coast, watching the waves, Garp the Fist, a Marine Vice Admiral and a living legend, arrived. He didn't come with a fleet. He came alone, munching on rice crackers. He thanked them for dealing with Crocodile, then casually mentioned that Naruto's father was the world's most wanted man, the Revolutionary Dragon. Before punching a hole through a building in a fit of pique and leaving. The revelation was dropped with the casualness of a weather report, leaving Naruto stunned and confused. He'd never had a father. The fourth Hokage had been a hero to emulate, a ghost to live up to, but not a dad. This, Dragon, it was a name without a face, another complication in a life already overflowing with them. When their new ship was finally unveiled, it was a masterpiece. A sleek, powerful brigantine sloop, christened the Thousand Sunny. Its figurehead was a beaming, Sun-faced lion, a tribute to its captain. And it had a feature that made Naruto's eyes light up. A Kuda burst, a cannon that could fire a blast of air powerful enough to launch the ship a kilometer through the sky. Their departure was joyous, a city-wide celebration sending them off to their next adventure. With Frankie now officially their shipwright, they set sail for the next leg of their journey, the treacherous waters leading to the New World. Their first taste of those waters was the Florian Triangle. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in, blanketing the sea in a perpetual twilight. The air grew cold, the sea eerily calm. Compasses spun uselessly. It was a graveyard of ships, a place where vessels vanished without a trace. "I don't like this," Nami said, her arms wrapped around herself as she stood at the helm of the Sunny. "The log pose is useless, the currents are dead. It's like the ocean itself is holding its breath. It feels empty," Naruto agreed, his sage mode senses picking up nothing but a vast, profound loneliness. There were no fish, no birds, no life. Just a cold, waiting silence. It was in this eerie quiet that they heard it. A faint, ghostly song drifting through the fog. A song of a lost love and a promise to a friend. It was Binks's sake. Following the sound, they came upon a bizarre sight. A talking skeleton with a magnificent afro, dressed in a gentleman's suit, enjoying a cup of tea on the deck of a ghost ship. This was Brook, a man who had died 50 years ago but had been brought back to life by his devil fruit, the Yomi Yomi no Mi. The crew's reaction was a mixture of terror, Leo and Nami, and fascination, Naruto. Naruto, who had dealt with reanimated corpses and talked to the spirits of the dead, found a talking skeleton to be perfectly reasonable. He invited Brook aboard for dinner. Much to Nami's chagrin, Brook's story was one of immense tragedy. He was the last survivor of the Rumbar pirates, who had all died from a poisoned weapon in this very triangle. He was fulfilling a promise to Laboon, a giant whale waiting for them at Reverse Mountain, a whale they had befriended decades ago. But there was a problem. His shadow had been stolen by one of the 7 warlords, Gecko Moria. Without a shadow, he was doomed to wander the fog forever, unable to bear the light of the sun. A stolen shadow, Naruto repeated, the concept striking a chord. Quote, another bully taking things that don't belong to him. He looked at the gentlemanly skeleton, at the deep, ancient sadness in his empty eye sockets. Well, we'll just have to get it back for you, then. Before they could formulate a plan, a massive island loomed out of the fog. It wasn't an island, it was a ship, the largest in the world, a floating gothic nightmare called Thriller Bark. A massive chain shot out, snaring the thousand Sunny and dragging them towards a gaping, monster-mouthed entrance. It's a trap, Nami yelled. Looks like fun, Naruto countered, his eyes glinting. Thriller Bark was a caricature of a horror movie. Creepy forests, a graveyard full of zombies, a mad scientist's laboratory. The crew was immediately separated. Nami, Leo, and Kale were captured by the invisible Absalom, one of Moria's commanders. Naruto, left with Robin and Frankie, found the whole experience to be hilarious. The zombies, lumbering corpses animated by stolen shadows, shambled towards them. Oben and Frankie prepared for a grim fight. Naruto just walked up to the lead zombie, a former pirate captain, and poked it. A jolt of golden, warm energy, a tiny spark of his life force, flowed into the zombie. The creature froze. The dull, lifeless look in its eyes was replaced by a flicker of confusion. The shadow animating it, unable to coexist with Naruto's vibrant life energy, was violently ejected. The zombie collapsed, and a pile of salt, the weakness of Moria's creations, lay where it had been. The original soul, which had been trapped within the corpse, was now free. A faint, ghostly image of a pirate captain appeared, tipped his hat to Naruto in thanks, and faded away. Whoa, Frankie said, you can exorcise them. I guess so, Naruto said, looking at his hand. My energy's too lively for them. It's like giving a glass of water to a guy made of salt. He grinned. This is gonna be easy. He proceeded to walk through the graveyard, cheerfully, purifying zombies by the dozen, much to the horror of Dr. Hogback, the mad scientist observing them. He wasn't fighting them, he was saving them. The true conflict came when he finally confronted Gecko Moria. The warlord was a giant, onion-shaped man with a lazy arrogant demeanor. He sat on a throne in his mansion, surrounded by his commanders. He had already stolen the shadows of several powerful fighters and was preparing to create his ultimate zombie. So, you're the sun god I've been hearing about, Moria sneered, lounging on his throne. You have a powerful shadow. A very powerful shadow. Kage no Kakume, shadow revolution. He gestured, and Naruto's shadow on the floor began to stretch, to peel away from his feet. I think I'll take it. Naruto looked down at his shadow, which was wiggling like a worm on a hook. He then looked at Moria, completely unimpressed. Nah, I don't think so. He stomped his foot. His shadow, which had been halfway off the ground, slammed back into place, reattaching itself to his feet. Moria stared, his jaw dropping. What? How did you do that? No one can resist my power. Your power is to control shadows, right? Naruto asked, tapping his chin thoughtfully. But my whole thing is being the sun god. I'm kinda the source of the light that makes the shadows. It's like you're a guy who's good at steering a boat, and I'm the ocean. You don't get to tell me where the currents go. This simple, infuriatingly logical explanation broke Moria's brain. His entire power was predicated on the idea that he was the master of all shadows. The concept that someone could be more of a source of shadow than him was something he couldn't compute. That doesn't make any sense. Moria shrieked. Doppelman. His own shadow detached from him, forming a solid, shape-shifting clone that attacked Naruto. Naruto's response was to make a shadow clone of his own. A real one, made of chakra. The two clones, one of shadow, one of energy, proceeded to get into a slap fight, ignoring the main battle entirely. The fight with Moria was a farce. The warlord, so used to fighting from a distance with his zombies and shadow-stealing powers, had no answer for a man he couldn't control and couldn't hurt. Naruto, in his Gear 5th form, bounced around the throne room, tying Moria's limbs into knots and generally making a mockery of him. But the real threat wasn't Moria. It was Ors, a colossal, ancient giant, resurrected as a zombie and animated with the shadow of a powerful, energetic fighter Moria had recently captured. And as the final battle began, the crew realized with dawning horror whose shadow it was. Ors began stretching, inflating, and shouting about becoming the king of the pirates. They had put Luffy's shadow in Ors. The battle against the giant zombie was a true all-hands-on-deck affair. The entire reunited crew, along with Brook, had to work together, combining their skills in a desperate attempt to bring the colossal beast down. It was a brutal, exhausting fight that pushed them to their limits. Naruto, however, saw the moral dilemma. This wasn't just a monster. It was a vessel containing the will and dream of someone he hadn't met but felt a strange kinship with. He couldn't just destroy it. He had to save the shadow. While his crew fought to immobilize Ors, Naruto confronted Moria directly. Give him back his shadow. Naruto demanded. Never. Moria cackled. With Ors, I will be the pirate king. He then used his ultimate technique, Shadow's Asgard, absorbing every single shadow on Thriller Bark into himself, becoming a monstrous, bloated giant of pure shadow energy. He was a mountain of stolen dreams and ambition. But to Naruto, he just looked sad. All these shadows, Naruto said, floating before the giant Moria, his own white hair blazing. All this strength, but none of it is yours. You're just a thief, hiding in the dark. Naruto didn't attack. He held out his hands, and a brilliant, blinding golden light erupted from his body. It wasn't an attack. It was a pure, unfiltered emission of his life force, of the sun itself. The light washed over Thriller Bark, and the thousands of stolen shadows within Moria began to writhe, to cry out for freedom. They were drawn to the light, to the promise of liberation. Moria screamed as his body began to crumble, unable to contain the rebelling shadows. With a final, explosive release, all 1,000 shadows shot out of him. Flying back to their original owners across the sea, Moria, drained and powerless, collapsed. The fight was over. Brook had his shadow back. The prisoners of Thriller Bark were free. But their victory was short-lived. As the sun began to rise, another figure appeared on the ruined island. A giant of a man in a simple black outfit, carrying a Bible. Bartholomew Kuma, another warlord of the sea. His presence was overwhelming, far greater than Moria's or even Crocodile's. He was calm, silent, and radiated an aura of immense, unstoppable power. Gecko Moria has been defeated, Kuma stated. His voice a deep, robotic monotone. The world government cannot afford to have another warlord fall, especially not to the likes of you. My orders are to eliminate everyone on this island. The crew, already exhausted and battered from their fight with oars, tensed. They were in no condition to fight another warlord, especially not one of this caliber. I don't think so, Naruto said, stepping forward. He was tired, his own energy depleted from the mass purification of the shadows. But he stood as an unshakable wall between Kuma and his family. Naruto Uzumaki, Kuma said, his gaze unsettling. Your existence is a problem. But my orders are absolute. He raised a hand, and a small, paw-printed bubble of air appeared. He compressed it and fired it. The Ursus shock was a bomb of pure, pressurized atmosphere. It detonated with the force of a small nuke, leveling what was left of Moria's mansion. Naruto had managed to get his crew out of the way, but the sheer power of the attack was staggering. This was a different league of enemy. I will not let you touch them, Naruto growled, his body flickering with the white flames of Gear 5th, forcing himself to draw on his last reserves. Kuma looked at the battered crew, then at Naruto. He seemed to be calculating. You are willing to sacrifice yourself for them. Always, Naruto replied without hesitation. Kuma paused. He then made a strange offer. He used his devil fruit power, the Nikyu Nikyu no Mi, to push all the pain and fatigue out of a single person, Monkey D. Luffy, whose unconscious body they had found. The pain formed a massive, red, bubbling sphere of pure agony. This is all the damage your captain sustained in his fight with Moria, Kuma said. If you, Naruto Uzumaki, are willing to take all of this into your own body, I will spare the lives of everyone here. I will report that your crew was wiped out. It was a test. A cruel, sadistic test. Don't do it, Naruto. Nami screamed, tears in her eyes. You'll die. He's right, Captain. Kale agreed, struggling to his feet. We'll fight together. Naruto looked at the sphere of pain. He could feel the agony radiating from it, the shattered bones, the torn muscles. The sheer exhaustion. It was a sea of suffering. He then looked at his friends, his family, all ready to die for him. He smiled, a soft, sad smile. Sorry, guys, Captain's orders. He turned to Kuma. Just let me do it away from them. I don't want them to see. Kuma nodded, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps respect, in his eyes. Naruto walked a short distance away, into a ruined courtyard, leaving his horrified crew behind. He stood before the paw-print bubble of pure agony. Do it, he said. Kuma placed a hand on the bubble, and it shot forward, enveloping Naruto completely. For the crew, there was only a flash of red light, and then silence. They waited, their hearts in their throats. Nami started to run towards the courtyard, fearing the worst, but Kale held her back. When the light faded and the sun had fully risen, they found him. Naruto was standing in the center of a crater, his own body having carved it from the force of the impact. He was covered in blood from head to toe. His clothes were shredded. His body was trembling from head to toe, every muscle screaming in agony. But he was standing. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't collapsed. He had taken all of it. A world of pain, and he was still on his feet. Nami broke free and ran to him, her own pain forgotten. She caught him just as his knees finally buckled, her arms wrapping around his bloody torso. You idiot, she sobbed into his chest, her tears mixing with the blood. You absolute, reckless, impossible idiot. He looked down at her, a weak, pained grin on his face. Hey, Nami, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Did we win? She could only nod, hugging him tighter, terrified by how close she had come to losing him. He had faced down gods and monsters with a laugh, but this quiet, solitary act of sacrifice was the most profound display of his strength she had ever witnessed. It was the strength of his love for them, a love so absolute he would absorb hell itself to keep them safe. In a dark, profane chamber deep within Mary Geoy's, Saint Icarus watched a recording of the event on Thriller Bark, provided by a hidden surveillance snail. He saw Naruto purify the zombies. He saw him defy Moria's shadow stealing. He saw him absorb the Ursus shock. He was not impressed. He was enraged. Mercy, empathy, Self-sacrifice, Icarus hissed, his voice trembling with contempt. These are not the qualities of a god. They are the diseases of the weak. He infects everyone he meets with this sentimentality. He turned to a robed figure kneeling in the corner, one of his fanatical followers. The research into the Void Century. The texts that speak of the first Nika's great enemy. Have you found it? Yes, my lord, the acolyte said, his head bowed. The texts speak of a primordial force. A being of pure despair, born from the collective sorrow of a forgotten age. A conceptual entity that opposed the first sun god. It is not a being of darkness, but of emptiness. A shadow that eats the sun. The ancient tongue called it, Nyx. A slow, terrible smile spread across Icarus's face. Emptiness. Despair. The perfect antithesis to his joy and hope. He looked at a large, covered object in the center of the room. It was a stasis pod, and inside, a powerful figure was held in suspended animation, a former high-ranking officer of the Rock's pirates, captured decades ago. Whose soul-based devil fruit made him the perfect catalyst. We cannot fight his fairy tale with weapons of steel, Icarus declared. We must fight it with a nightmare. Begin the ritual. We will create a vessel. We will give this Nyx a body. We will unleash a plague of despair upon this world, an anti-god to silence his laughter forever. The acolyte bowed, his eyes gleaming with fanatical light. It will be done, my lord. We will unmake the sun god. The hunt was over. The war for the world's soul was about to begin. Chapter 7 End.